On February 12, 2025, Barry Moore arrived at the Hennessy's home and was let in through a black steel door by Jade Hennessy, a female relative of the brothers, believing he was meeting people he had known his whole life. But what he encountered changed his life forever. Moore was branded and severely burned. This attack was one in a series of violent incidents that has taken place in Dublin since the assault on Jason Hennessy Sr., the Hennessy gang's leader, on Christmas Eve 2023. Moore had been associated with the Hennessy gang, a notorious crime group operating in West Dublin throughout his entire life. Moore was suspected of committing the ultimate betrayal, ratting them out to the authorities. As a result, his relationship with the gang took a deadly turn. Earlier that week, police had seized firearms and drugs from a field in Corduff, and the gang believed Moore had leaked the information to authorities. In their world, there was only one punishment for such action, and that's elimination. The Hennessy brothers, sons of the late Hennessy Sr., were determined to uphold their family's violent reputation. Since their father's murder, they had become hungrier for power, getting it through violence, drug dealing, and intimidation. Joining them in their operation were Kenneth Fitzsimons and his son, Dean Fitzsimons. They were close associates of the gang and deeply embedded in its operation, ensuring that anyone who crossed the Hennessys paid the ultimate price. On the day of the incident, when Moore arrived at the house, everything seemed normal at first, but then suddenly, Jason Jr. grabbed Moore's phone right out of his hand. Before Moore could react, Jason punched him in the face and demanded he tell the truth. But they didn't tell him which truth exactly they wanted. They had already made up their minds that Moore was a rat, and he was going to pay the price. At some point, Kenneth Fitzsimons brought out a 5-foot steel bar. He swung it at Moore's legs, hitting him over and over again with full force. Then Brandon, the youngest of the three brothers, took the bar from him and kept beating Moore all over his body. But the worst was when Jason Jr. pulled out a branding iron with the word rat engraved boldly on it and said, "He'll talk after this." He pulled out a camping stove, lit it, and started heating the iron. After some time, they decided that the iron was hot enough, and Jason Jr. took it and pressed it against Moore's stomach not once, but 6 times. Moments before this, Kenneth's son, Dean, joined in the attack, riding an electric motorbike straight at Moore, running over his legs. As Moore groaned in pain, Dean laughed and said, "I've been waiting for you," attesting to the fact that the attack wasn't spontaneous. Dean then picked up the steel bar and started hitting Moore. He also grabbed an axe, flipped it around, and started hitting him with the blunt end of the weapon. The attack lasted for around 20 minutes, and the helpless Moore had no way to fight back. As Moore writhed in pain, Jason demanded to know who set them up. But no matter how much Moore insisted he didn't know, Jason didn't believe him. To make his point, he branded Moore's face with the hot iron. Then the violence almost took an even darker turn when Brandon suggested they pull down Moore's tracksuit bottoms and violate him with a stick. Luckily, that never happened. They went on to threaten to burn his house down and torture him while his children watched. But in the end, they did none of that. Instead, just as suddenly as the attack had begun, they decided to let him go. But before Moore could leave, they wiped his phone and deleted all his messages. Barely able to stand from the severe injuries, he stumbled out of the house. Somehow, he managed to drive to a relative's home before collapsing. Sensing that something horrific had happened, the relative quickly called the emergency service. Moore was rushed to the hospital and doctors quickly assessed his injuries. While he was stabilized, it was immediately clear that he had suffered extensive trauma. Burns covered 3 to 4% of his body, and he had deep bruising, possible fractures, and severe swelling. On February 13th, Moore gave a full statement to the Gardaí, detailing every horrifying moment of the attack. With his testimony in hand, law enforcement swiftly obtained search and arrest warrants for multiple properties linked to the gang. 2 days later, more than 100 officers launched simultaneous raids across Corduff and Blanchardstown, with the Hennessy's family home being one of their primary targets. They forced their way inside the residence, securing it within minutes. In the backyard, they found a small garden believed to be the place Moore was interrogated and tortured. By the end of the operation, all 5 men were taken into custody. All the men were charged with assault causing serious harm and false imprisonment, both of which carry potential life sentences. They also faced charges for producing weapons during a dispute, referring to the branding iron, steel bars, and axe used in the attack. Despite the overwhelming evidence against them, the accused remained defiant in court. Dean Fitzsimons became aggressive, shouting at officers and telling them before eventually apologizing to the judge. Shortly after, Jason also disrupted the proceedings, angrily denying ownership of several vehicles linked to him. Judge Paula Murphy eventually denied bail, ruling that the men posed a serious risk to witnesses and public safety. All 5 were remanded in custody and sent to Clover Hill Prison. With their leaders behind bars, the Hennessy gang's grip on Corduff was shattered. For years, they had ruled through violence and intimidation, but their tactics had finally backfired. Due to their own paranoia, they turned on one of their own and eventually fell into a trap. The patriarch of the gang, late Hennessy Sr., had built a reputation as a dangerous and deadly figure, deeply entrenched in organized crime, drug trafficking, and feud. But despite growing up surrounded by crime, Hennessy Sr. initially led a relatively normal life. As a young man, he was a promising boxer, and for most of his adulthood, he avoided serious criminal activities. He worked various jobs, including as a truck driver, and managed to stay out of trouble even while living in Sheep Hill Avenue, Corduff, an area deeply entrenched in gang culture. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, the neighborhood was controlled by the Westies gang, which dominated the heroin trade in Dublin. When the gang collapsed following the murders of its leaders, Shane Coates and Stephen Sugg, in Spain in 2004, a power vacuum emerged. Various factions rose to fill the void, and while Hennessy's friends and family members became involved in these successor gangs, he remained largely uninvolved. However, that changed in 2016 when he had his first major run-in with the law. He was charged, along with a family member, for engaging in threatening and abusive behavior and for resisting or willfully obstructing garde à vue during a dispute near his home in Corduff. More serious charges were to follow. In 2022, he found himself in court facing serious charges of money laundering. He was accused of possessing €3,050 in criminal proceeds at a Bank of Ireland branch in Blanchardstown and of being in possession of a stolen Suzuki motorbike. His case was set to go before a jury in 2025, and he was even granted legal aid after the court heard he was earning just €350 a week. The charges represented only a tiny fraction of the suspected offense carried out by Hennessy and his associates. Garde à vue suspected that Hennessy and his crew were running a massive drug operation, using intimidation tactics to keep their grip on the streets of West Dublin. These criminal enterprises brought gang members into conflict with several rival groups. One of the feuds led to dozens of violent incidents, including arson attacks, shootings, and assaults throughout 2018 and 2019. In one incident, shots were fired at a man outside Riversdale Community College in Corduff as he waited for a relative to finish school. More recently, Hennessy's fellow criminals clashed with associates of Tristan Sherry from Finglas, who was seen by Garde à vue as a low-level organized crime figure. After attacking one of Hennessy's associates in 2023, Sherry found himself on the receiving end of a violent retaliation. This culminated in the events of December 24th, when Sherry and one other man stormed into Brown's Steakhouse in Blanchardstown, armed with a machine pistol. They opened fire, hitting Hennessy in the neck. But this wasn't going to be a clean hit and run. Members of Hennessy's group tackled Sherry, and what followed was absolute chaos. Sherry was beaten and stabbed to death right there in the restaurant. As for Hennessy, he was rushed to the hospital by a family member, where doctors were able to stabilize his condition, but he was pronounced dead a week later. 6 men were later charged for Sherry's murder. Similar to their father, the Hennessy's brothers are also deeply involved in the criminal world, and without their father's influence, their actions became even more reckless and violent. Devin Hennessy, the eldest, had long been involved in the Coolock Feud, a brutal gang war filled with shootings, stabbings, and firebomb attacks. Authorities repeatedly warned him that he was a marked man, even issuing a Garda information message in 2024. But Devin wasn't one to lay low. Just months after his father's murder, in August 2024, he survived an assassination attempt while driving a bulletproof BMW. This wasn't his first brush with death either. Back in 2019, another car he was in was shot at 5 times. He walked away unharmed, but when questioned by Garda, he refused to cooperate. In March 2020, Devin was convicted of violent disorder after attacking a man outside a courthouse. The situation got so out of hand that it took 20 officers to restrain him, but his criminal record didn't end there. In September 2024, despite the numerous threats on his life, Devin was caught with a stash of cocaine near Clover Hill Prison and convicted of drug dealing. Even with a target on his back, he refused to back down from the drug trade. Jason Hennessy Jr., the middle brother, was easily the most aggressive of the three. His reputation for violent outbursts wasn't just gang-related. Some of his attacks seemed completely unprovoked. Back in 2018, he received a 2-year suspended sentence for a brutal hammer attack in Dublin city center. Jason had gone to his car, grabbed a hammer and an iron bar, and attacked 2 men. One victim suffered a 4-centimeter head wound, while the other ended up with tendon damage to his fingers. In 2022, Jason was convicted of assaulting 2 female officers after they stopped a family member on suspicion of driving without insurance. Instead of complying, he spat in one officer's face. And when he was taken into custody, he had the audacity to laugh at the judge, saying he expected the court to be biased, but didn't care because he got 4 weeks off. Despite being the youngest of the 3 brothers, Brandon Hennessy was already deeply involved in the criminal world by the time he turned 17. In January 2021, authorities caught him bearing cocaine worth over 32,000 euros near Blanchardstown. He was part of a surveillance operation, and when officers moved in, he tried to flee but was eventually caught and arrested. 3 years later, in early 2025, Brandon was given a 3-year suspended sentence for drug trafficking. After their father's death, the Hennessy brothers launched a violent campaign of terror in Coolock. Anyone they perceived as a threat was targeted, and firebomb attacks became frequent, often with innocent families caught in the crossfire. But Barrymore's attack was where authorities drew the line. They believed the gang was losing control, making reckless and irrational decisions, and with mounting evidence against them, this could very well be the final act that sealed the Hennessy gang downfall. November 18, 2023, Brandon Ledwidge was at his home on Barry Drive in Finglas, a Dublin area notorious for crime and gangland violence. When he heard a knock at the door, he went out into the front garden, not knowing he was about to meet his maker. The attacker, believed to be a member of his own crew, pulled out a gun and shot him at close range. Ledwidge was hit in the chest and head in what seemed to be a planned execution. As the investigation into the crime began to unfold, one thing was clear: Ledwidge was killed by someone he knew. But why? Brandon Ledwidge grew up in Finglas, a working-class area of Dublin's north side that's notorious for crime and drug problems. Crime wasn't an abstract concept for him. It was part of daily life in the community. At 23 years, he had a criminal record for drug-related offenses. Garda records show he was charged 3 times for possession of hard drugs for supply, with a court date set just days after his death. Before he turned to crime, he was a talented footballer, playing as a defender for Finglas Celtic in his youth. Living in this environment, Ledwidge was introduced to the criminal underworld early on. His uncle Kevin Ledwidge was brutally killed in his Finglas home on July 15, 2007. 2 men approached the house, and when Kevin opened the door, he was shot multiple times in what was an intentional attack. His demise, like Brandon's later fate, had all the hallmarks of a hit. It showed the harsh reality of life in Finglas. During his teenage years, Brandon became part of the Gucci Gang, a notorious drug-dealing crew known for their flashy lifestyle love of designer clothes, and no-nonsense approach to their illegal activities. The gang led by Mr. Flashy was a well-oiled machine. Brandon was more than just a foot soldier. He was an enforcer, collecting payments and making sure the gang's business was running smoothly. He was involved in the distribution of hard drugs and other illegal substances in Finglas. He was a respected but replaceable cog. Brandon started out as an enforcer for the Gucci gang, but later switched to a smaller family-orientated gang in Finglas that dealt in hard drugs. This change of allegiance seems to have played a part in his murder. The Gucci gang started out as a loose group of young lads in their 20s who operated in Finglas. Under Mr. Flashy, they became known for drug dealing and living the high life, dressed to the nines and documenting it all on social media. Unlike the Kinahan cartel, they were a smaller operation. As they got more famous, so did the attention from the Gardaí. They intensified their efforts, seizing drugs, arresting people, and focusing on key members of the gang. Gardaí's previous crackdowns had weakened the gang, and by 2023, they had lost a lot of power. Mr. Flashy had fled to Wexford and left the gang in tatters. The gang was falling apart. Some were caught, some went on the run, and some, like Brandon, were looking for new alliances to help them get out of their situation. Ledwidge's new alliance was with a smaller Finglas gang that stayed out of the spotlight and ran a continuous narcotics operation. This was more than a backup plan. It was a new start for a certain criminal network that was still powerful in the local drug trade. But even with this new crew, he was a small player in the bigger picture. This gang had connections to more dangerous criminals, including connections to the Kinahan organization through people like Robert Brown, a hitman who has been in prison since 2018. Ledwidge was a distributor for this firm, overseeing medicine sales across the region. Brandon presented himself as a wealthy mobster on social media, wearing designer clothes, promoting premium products, and posting pictures from his holidays. To the outside world, he seemed to be doing well, reaping the benefits of his criminal lifestyle. But beneath the surface, he was just another player in a violent game. A man in danger, living in a world where loyalty was fleeting and betrayal often ended in fatal consequences. As the months went by before his murder, Brandon was in big trouble. He was embroiled in several drug possession with intent to supply cases, and it was putting pressure on him and those around him. But the threat wasn't just from the Gardaí. There were whispers he had cut ties with those who had previously protected him. By early 2023, Ledwidge was in a tight spot. He had survived the demise of the Gucci gang and had set himself up in a new crew. But in the weeks leading up to his death, something changed. According to the investigators, he made a fatal mistake. At approximately 7 p.m. on that chilly Saturday night, Brandon opened the door, likely anticipating a friend's arrival, unaware of the threats that lay outside. However, the individual waiting outside had no intention of engaging in conversation. Gunfire erupted suddenly, and within moments, he was on the ground. According to Gardaí investigations, the shooter was a member of Ledwidge's gang rather than a rival organization. The assailant allegedly did not conceal his name, implying a personal motive. The evidence indicates that a pistol was used in the attack. After the murder, Gardaí established an incident room at Finglas Garda Station for a thorough investigation. They secured the crime scene on Berry Drive, analyzed CCTV footage, and performed door-to-door inspections. However, community cooperation has been limited. The primary suspect readily went to a Garda station a few days after the incident, but no charges were filed by March 2025. The probe is still ongoing. In the aftermath, fear permeated the community, resulting in an eerie silence. Officers went door to door looking for witnesses, but in neighborhoods like Finglas, inhabitants were typically hesitant to speak. This could lead to danger on their doorstep. Ledwidge's funeral was held at St. Canice's Church in Finglas, drawing a large crowd. Young people on scrambler bikes showcased stunts outside, and his silver coffin was brought in during the service. Online tributes poured in from family and friends, including heartfelt messages from his sister Casey. Unfortunately, his family then received threats and was supposedly told to leave Finglas. The group is still active, prompting concerns about potential reprisal violence in the neighborhood. Brandon Ledwidge's death was most likely the result of several causes. According to investigators, he may have made a significant error that resulted in his death. One idea holds that Brandon was attempting to break away and start his own organization within the criminal underground. Such an action would be interpreted as a direct challenge to the existing power structures. After seeing the collapse of one group, he may have been looking to establish himself as an independent dealer with the necessary connections. A source mentioned to the media, it's possible he was trying to go out on his own, and that's why he was targeted. If this is accurate, it would have positioned him as a considerable threat to his former associates. The gang he was affiliated with dominated the local drug market, and allowing one of their own to compete was intolerable. His murder could serve as a cautionary tale to others, illustrating the consequences of defying the established order. Another possibility is that he had a direct altercation with a senior member of the group. According to sources, he was involved in a heated argument with a high-ranking gang member just before his death. In these criminal surroundings, any type of contempt or defiance is prohibited. When a subordinate opposes a person of superior position, the reaction is swift and harsh. Some assume that his murder was motivated not only by the need to eliminate a threat, but also by the desire to strengthen the gang's hold on power. Another theory suggests that his death was a preemptive action. With legal issues looming, authorities were monitoring Ledwidge closely. If his gang believed he might collaborate with law enforcement to lessen his own punishment, they would see that as a threat. By eliminating him, they guaranteed he would never have the opportunity to become an informant. The day after the shooting, police convened a case conference to determine a clear motive. However, the community in Finglas had already grasped the situation. The individuals involved were not outsiders. They were the very people Brandon had collaborated with and once trusted. A friend said on social media, "You know you can't even trust your own lads." Finglas has been a hotspot for drug-related crime, prompting regular raids by the Gardaí. Ledwidge's murder marked the end of an 11-month stretch without a gang-related killing in Ireland, indicating a resurgence of violence in the area. His death highlights the fragile dynamics of trust and power within these groups, where perceived threats often lead to deadly consequences. The Gucci Gang was born in Coolock, a neighborhood notorious for its crime and violence. This gang was different from the others because it was made up of young, eager dealers. They stood out because they were obsessed with money and comfort. On social media, they were known for their flashy cars, expensive clothes, and huge amounts of cash. They weren't just dealers. They were names that gave the impression of untouchable power. The gang, which was led by the mystery man known as Mr. Flashy, quickly became the biggest criminal organization in Dublin. They controlled the show and used carefully planned operations to hide their money. But beneath the surface was a much darker story, one built on drugs, violence, and ruthless crime. But there were cracks starting to show through the shine. Things got worse as their power grew. Unpaid bills and rivalries started to weaken the gang. The close group, which used to be loyal, began to split up. Sean Little and Zach Parker, who used to be Mr. Flashy's friends, could feel that there was a power battle coming. It wasn't just about drugs anymore. It was about having power. Another question is what happens when you lose power? The gang was falling apart, and one important betrayal set off a chain of violence that no one could have seen coming. Zach Parker's life had always been a small business, but as he rose in the criminal world, he got caught in a dangerous web of debt. Parker owed the Gucci Gang 200,000 euros, which was a huge amount of money. He couldn't pay it back. He did borrow drugs, but the cops found them and took them away before he could sell them. In the cruel world of organized crime, there was only one way out: die. Also, there was still a bill to pay. Parker thought that today, January 17, 2019, would be like any other day. He was only thinking about the road ahead as he left the gym. Then something caught him off guard. The shooter quickly emerged from the shadows and began firing at Parker's car. The attack took place quickly and was meant to show that the Gucci gang would not forgive. His body was found in the driver's seat, slumped over. It was a scary way to remember people who might get caught up in the cruel game of crime. There was more going on than just justice in the killing. It was the start of something much bigger. Things were going badly for the Gucci gang now that they were in a bloody power struggle. After Parker was killed, there was a lot of violence, and more people were killed with each move. But there was still one more big surprise to come. Parker would trust someone close to him to do something that no one saw coming. As the gang got more and more crazy, payback was on the horizon, and the next person who died would be even worse. It was getting easier for the Gucci gang to escape. Who would be the next person to fall? After Zach Parker was killed, Sean Little quickly went from being sad to wanting to get payback. For him, Parker wasn't just another co-worker, he was family, and if someone killed his brother, there would be consequences. Little was very angry, and he made it clear to everyone in the Gucci gang that Parker's death would be avenged no matter what. But when Little tried to get even, the gang started to fall apart. The Gucci gang used to be joined by their desire to be successful and show off their wealth, but now they were very split up. The people who supported Little were ready to fight back right away and were hungry for blood. Mr. Flashy, the gang's boss, though, didn't say anything. He knew what was at stake. If the police pay too much attention or there is too much chaos, the gang's plans could fall apart. Things were getting worse, and the cops were starting to notice. It was clear that things were getting worse among the Gucci gang. Should they act quickly to get back at them, or should they hold back and try to keep things under control? The split made the gang less cohesive, and every day there was a greater chance of deception. For Little, getting revenge wasn't just about getting even. It was a fight for the gang's soul. There was one question that kept coming up. Who could they trust in this power struggle? The answer would have a twist that would kill. In May 2019, when Sean Little was brutally killed, the Gucci gang lost all of its power and could no longer be fixed. Little had been a rising star in the gang before he was killed in a cold, planned hit meant to send a chilling message. The attack wasn't just about one person, it was a message to everyone in the gang. Betrayal has consequences. Even though the murder was shocking, it wasn't completely unexpected. Too many people were against Little because he was trying to get revenge, and his rising power was seen as a threat. Most people think that the hit was planned by different groups within the Gucci gang, maybe even those who were loyal to Mr. Flashy, but were less careful because Little was so hungry for blood. It was the last blow to a gang that was already on the verge of breaking up. The next thing that happened was embarrassing and people saw it. The sad fact that Little's body was found in an empty place shows that no one is safe in the underworld. The gang was shocked when he died, but it also made them dislike each other more. It was more than just drugs or money, it was also about power. Killings made things worse, and more people were killed. Some new people joined the game. He was one of the weirdest people. His part in Little's death made people doubt him even more. What did he do to play this dangerous game of cat and mouse? There would be more lies, betrayals, and bloody power grabs in the gang. The fights were far from over. Who was going to come next? In less than 24 hours, someone else was brutally killed. It was Jordan Davis, who was close to Sean Little. At noon, Davis was shot while moving his stroller with his child in it. It was a scary display of power. Because of how public his death was, it was clear that the Gucci gang was losing power in the area. Not only was the violence happening in dark alleys and back rooms, but it was also happening in public, putting innocent people in danger. The killing of Davis was a key event in the fall of the Gucci gang's power. The gang was going crazy after being invincible for a while. The killings weren't just happening in the criminal world anymore. They were happening all the time in the neighborhood. The Gucci gang's control over Coolock kept getting weaker as each death added to the pile. The gang's power decreased with each attack. What began as a fight for power had turned into an uncontrollable murder. The gang members lost trust in each other and started to worry about their own safety. It wasn't about who would be killed next, It was about how long they could last in this never-ending cycle of payback. One more person steps forward, and what they do will tip the scales even further. Who will be the next person to die in this war for power? Hamid Sambar, once a trusted ally of Sean Little, soon found himself under suspicion. The Gucci gang talked about it. Did Sambar know about the hit on Little? Had he helped set up his old friend with someone else? It was hard to ignore the reports, especially since Sambar was seen with Little's family just hours before he was killed. After that, Sambar was the next person who was killed. Murdered outside of the Little's home by masked attackers, he was killed in cold blood. A cruel deception. It wasn't just another killing in a gang. It was the last, worst act of payback. Sambar was once very important, but now he was gone from the game he helped make possible. His death caused the Gucci gang's kingdom to start to fall apart. The gang finally broke up because of the problems that had been building up inside. The group that used to work together and be dangerous was now just a broken, suspicious shell of what it used to be. The gang was weak because of constant killings, mistrust, and shifting alliances, and it was heading toward its eventual end. As the gang's internal problems got worse, another crushing blow came. Ian Boylan, a member of the gang for a long time, was killed in cold blood. His death was the last act of betrayal. Boylan was shot and killed just hours after joining forces with Sambar's followers. His death left a lot of questions unanswered. Any longer was just a battle for power. It was a fight to stay alive, and the gang was breaking up. Boylan's death put an end to the Gucci gang and showed that no one was safe in this cruel fight, no matter how close they were. The Gucci gang was no longer in charge, but the damage they caused was far from over. Who would be the next leader? Would the violence keep going, or was the city ready for something worse? The answer was getting closer than anyone thought, even though it was hidden. More people were killed, and the city started to shake from the violence. Finally, the police stepped in. As the police cracked down harder on the Gucci gang, the gang's power over Coolock began to weaken with each raid. As detectives closed in on the operation, they watched as the gang members gave up under the pressure and collected information. The kingdom, which used to be untouchable, was now broken and easy to attack. The last blow was quick. The Gucci gang's business fell apart like a house of cards when the last few members were caught or killed. They used to have full control over Coolock, but now there was a dangerous power void there. The streets, which used to be known for their flashy power, were now full of doubt. But even though the police were getting tighter, the criminal world was far from quiet. There were new players coming out of the dark who were eager to take the place of the Gucci gang. After the Gucci gang destroyed a city, it was haunted by the murders they caused. But the cycle of violence, payback, and betrayal was still going strong, even though the gang's reign of terror was over. There were still fights in the streets of Coolock, and things were about to get worse. Would the police ever be able to put an end to this chaos, or would someone else step up and take over? As one part ended, a new one that was even more dangerous was about to start. The murderous betrayals of the Gucci gang shook Dublin's criminal scene to its core. But the violence that broke up the gang is just a small sample of how Irish gangland crime is always changing. With new people coming into Dublin's underworld, who will be in charge next? The story isn't over yet. The fight for power is still going on.
Operation Thor was launched in 2015 by the Drugs and Organised Crime Bureau, Ireland's primary anti-gang unit, with the goal of destroying burglary groups. During this operation, a committed group of Garda officers used high-performance vehicles to pursue criminals. The team, who started off with 6 players, saw a significant improvement in 2016 when they added a silver Golf R to their lineup. This vehicle was notable as it had once belonged to Liam Byrne, a key player in the Byrne organised crime gang. In March 2016, during a raid on this gang, authorities confiscated 29 vehicles, including the notable Golf R. The Byrne organised crime group, led by Liam Byrne, a prominent figure in Ireland's criminal underground, has connections to the Kinahan Cartel. Despite being involved in gang disputes, arms smuggling and drug trafficking, Byrne has never been imprisoned for his organised crime activities. Who is Liam Byrne, popularly known as Bugsy, and what made him a trustworthy member of the Kinahan organization and one of Ireland's top criminals? Let's investigate this more. Liam Byrne was born in October 1980 and grew up in a family steeped in crime in Crumlin, southwest Dublin. James Jaws Byrne, his father, had a criminal past and was formerly connected to the notorious Robert Martin, the General Cahill. Sadie, Liam's mother, comes from the Rowe family, which has deep connections to the organised crime scene in Dublin. Liam utilised these relationships to advance in Dublin's criminal underworld, primarily through family ties, particularly with relatives such as Liam Brannigan, Liam Rowe, and Freddie Thompson. Of the 17 main members of his gang, 7 are first cousins of the Rowe family. Jaws owns the Byrne family's house in Crumlin, even though they don't have a reliable source of income. Authorities have seized money and goods from their home throughout the years, including a Rolex watch worth more than €35,000. Jaws has never disclosed how he became wealthy, even in spite of repeated seizures. Liam Byrne, recognized for his aggressive behavior since his early teenage years, became involved in drug trafficking and thefts alongside a group of teenage boys from Crumlin and Darndale. They obtained drugs from Christy Kinahan, who was active in both Ireland and the UK. At 17, Liam was given a suspended sentence for armed robbery, but later faced imprisonment for assaulting Trevor Donnelly with a baseball bat. Although he tried to persuade Donnelly's partner not to testify, she went ahead and was later attacked. Before Liam was imprisoned, his gang fractured after a Garda raid, resulting in a rivalry between different factions. During this turmoil, Dean Gavin, a close associate of Liam, was killed, and David Byrne, Liam's brother, testified against the killer, Brian Regan. When Liam was released from Mountjoy prison in 2004, his former teenage gang had evolved into a significant drug trafficking operation under the leadership of Freddie Thompson, who received supplies from Christy Kinahan. Liam joined Kinahan in Spain, where he coordinated the shipment of drugs and weapons to Ireland, but returned home due to increased scrutiny from Spanish law enforcement. Once back in Ireland, Liam collaborated with Thompson to manage drug shipments from Kinahan, overseeing their distribution and debt collection. After Thompson left in 2007 to 2008 due to a conflict with the Irish National Liberation Army, Liam took over leadership of the gang, which was later identified by the Criminal Assets Bureau as the Byrne Organised Crime Group. They focused on monitoring the Kinahan cartel's operations in Ireland for nearly 6 years. The gang's activities continued mainly unabated despite efforts by law enforcement, including drug seizures totaling more than €10 million, with drugs coming in from countries like Afghanistan, Morocco, and Colombia. The conflict escalated significantly in 2016 when Gerry Hutch, who had previously been seen as Daniel Kinahan's trusted associate, turned against him, igniting a violent rivalry between the Kinahan and Hutch families. Gerry was murdered in Spain in 2015, which prompted a retaliatory strike at Dublin's Regency Hotel during a boxing event that Daniel Kinahan and members of the Byrne group attended. In this attack, David Byrne, Liam's brother, was killed. The carefully orchestrated assault, carried out by at least 12 members of the Hutch gang, quickly heightened the conflict. Tragically, before David Byrne's funeral could take place, Eddie Hutch, Gary's uncle, was also shot dead. In the following 6 months, a wave of violence unfolded, with the Kinahan-Hutch feud resulting in 18 fatalities so far. Liam's house, which he purchased in 2011 for €250,000 under his sister's name, was among the homes raided by the Garda a month after the Regency attack. The house had extensive renovations that cost €740,000, and it had opulent features like a home theatre, bar, gym, and jacuzzi. It was equipped with high-end security, including bulletproof windows, CCTV, and a room decorated with sports memorabilia, including signed jerseys and photos with celebrities like boxer Marvin Hagler. One of the rooms was designated for gang gatherings. Liam's car dealership, which was involved in the laundering of narcotics money, was shuttered after he was exposed as the leader of the Byrne crime group. Real properties, beautiful automobiles, cash and watches were among the many assets seized by authorities. The High Court determined that these items, totaling €2.7 million, were linked to illegal activities. Liam's property was repossessed and sold in 2021 for €400,000, but it is now abandoned and empty, with boarded-up windows and doors surrounded by overgrown vegetation. After facing setbacks from the Kinahan-Hutch feud and the Criminal Assets Bureau, Liam fled to the UK in 2019, settling in Birmingham near his brother-in-law, Thomas Bomber Kavanagh, a key figure in both the Byrne and Kinahan operations. Bomber, once a leader in the cartel's UK operations, was sentenced to 21 years in prison in March 2022 for drug importation. Liam then assumed control of Kinahan's UK operations alongside Sean McGovern. Liam was identified by the Criminal Assets Bureau as a top figure in Irish organised crime. In an unexpected development, Liam was captured on the island of Mallorca and deported from Spain to the UK to stand trial for allegedly trafficking firearms to other criminal groups. In addition to potentially upending the Dublin branch of the Kinahan cartel, this event signifies the end of his dominance in the criminal underworld. Byrne's fortune appeared to have finally changed when heavily armed police arrested him during a secretive visit to the Spanish resort. He was detained while dining with his family at a restaurant on the island in early June, having lived openly in Dubai for several years before embarking on a European vacation. The gun-related charges in Britain mark the first gang-related accusations Byrne has encountered after a two-decade ascent to the pinnacle of Ireland's drug trade. Now, at 43 years old, this notorious criminal, who has managed to evade capture for years, faces the possibility of a lengthy prison sentence. The Byrne organised crime gang has established itself as a significant player in Ireland's criminal underbelly, infamous for their engagement in drug trafficking and acts of violence. Their strong ties with the Kinahan cartel have reinforced their status in the criminal world, allowing them to exploit the cartel's family connections for their benefit. Authorities suspect that Byrne and his crew have been instrumental in a string of murders and attacks aimed at the Hutch family and their associates following the Regency incident. As the Criminal Assets Bureau intensified its efforts, Byrne fled to the UK, where he is thought to have taken on the role of second-in-command within the Kinahan cartel, following his associate Thomas Bomber Kavanagh. Intelligence reports indicated that Byrne had somewhat separated himself from the higher ranks of the cartel operating in the Middle East. He allegedly formed his own criminal organisation, reportedly involved in the trafficking of firearms and drugs. The UK's National Crime Agency was investigating Byrne's activities, while also looking into the criminal assets of Thomas Bomber Kavanagh. Moreover, Byrne was accused of making threats against various individuals in England, including a property developer and several business leaders. His most significant charge, however, was his role in leading a criminal group that trafficked weapons within the UK. Reports suggest that Byrne's organisation procured handguns and submachine guns designed to avoid detection and hinder police investigations, which they then sold to other criminal groups. The operation was extensive, with one group reportedly ordering 14 firearms in a single transaction. The capture of Liam Byrne represented a major blow to the Kinahan cartel, further intensified by the prior arrest of another cartel associate at Malaga Airport. Jack Kavanagh, the 22-year-old son of Bomber Kavanagh, was apprehended while travelling from Dubai to Turkey. Both Byrne and Kavanagh were linked to the procurement and distribution of firearms, as indicated by intercepted EncroChat communications. Byrne was ultimately sentenced to 5 years in prison. Recent events emphasize the continuous work of global law enforcement agencies to break up and dismantle organised crime syndicates. The cooperation among agencies from different countries showcases a strong commitment to ensuring that individuals are held responsible for their illegal actions, which supports the larger objective of improving public safety.
It's Christmas Eve at 8 p.m. in Brown's Steakhouse, Blanchardstown. Two men enter the establishment, and one of them, 26-year-old Tristan Sherry, heads towards a booth where members of the Blanchardstown mob are seated. Employed by Mr. Flashy, the leader of the Gucci gang, Sherry pulls a submachine gun from his jacket and attempts to shoot, but the weapon malfunctions. As he tries to escape, he finds the back door locked. Cornered, he is attacked by several members of the mob. Sherry is ultimately killed, suffering nearly 30 stab wounds from a steak knife, being struck with a bar stool, and shot in the head with his own firearm. As the investigation into the incident began to unfold, one thing was clear. The hit was supposed to be a statement from Mr. Flashy, but it ended in disaster. It was another one of the usual gang violence caused by two rival gangs that ruled Dublin. However, who is Mr. Flashy and what is the origin of the bloody feud between these two gangs? Who is this strange person known as Mr. Flashy? He is 30 years old and heads the Gucci gang, which controls a major chunk of the lucrative hard drug market in Dublin's northern suburbs, particularly Finglas, where he wields tremendous power. He has become infamous in Ireland for flaunting his enormous wealth on various social media sites, generating both admiration and envy from the public. His squad, known for its intense love of luxury brands like Gucci, Louis Vuitton, and Rolex, has developed a distinct reputation through their unrelenting obsession with designer labels and the showy lifestyle they flaunt online. However, underlying this expertly built facade of riches and leisure lies a smart and deadly criminal organization known for horrific bloodshed. Mr. Flashy's rapid ascent to power followed the notorious 2016 assassination of David Byrne, a high-ranking member of the Kinahan Cartel, which is considered the most feared organized crime syndicate in Ireland. When Byrne was viciously killed at a boxing weigh-in, the cartel's previously firm hold on Dublin was momentarily compromised, allowing the ambitious Mr. Flashy to seize control of Finglas and other areas in North Dublin through calculated violence and intimidation. By early 2017, he had established himself as the clear leader in the northern drug trade, allegedly making an impressive £22,000 weekly from hard drug sales alone. This amount highlights the significant profitability of Dublin's illegal drug market. The Blanchardstown Gang represents a distinct kind of criminal organization. This closely knit, family-operated group is based in Blanchardstown, located just west of Dublin's city center. At its core is a powerful trio consisting of a father and his two sons who have built a long and violent legacy marked by conflicts with Mr. Flashy's Gucci gang. The Irish police, the Garda Síochána, are familiar with this family's illegal activities, but their real names cannot be revealed due to legal restrictions. Their activities include large-scale drug trafficking, extortion, money laundering, and a number of violent crimes that have long terrorized the local community. The long-standing and murderous competition between these two formidable crime syndicates has lasted for many years, with violence increasing dramatically over time. According to accounts, Glenn O'Toole, a hired killer linked with the Blanchardstown gang, was on his way to murder Mr. Flashy when he was caught by police in 2017. A search revealed that he was carrying a loaded weapon and a silencer, providing unequivocal evidence of his murderous intentions. O'Toole was unable to fulfill his mission. In a startling turn of events, he was discovered dead in his prison cell just a week later, with many investigators leaning towards suicide, although whispers of foul play continue to circulate within Dublin's criminal circles. The Gucci gang viewed this event as a significant betrayal, leading to a swift and violent retaliation. Mr. Flashy's crew invaded O'Toole's wake, showcasing blatant disrespect and igniting a massive brawl at the Cardiff Inn pub. Following the chaos, 7 men were arrested, with 4 ultimately convicted, including notable figures from both rival factions. The cycle of retaliatory violence has continued, worsening as rival gangs vie for dominance in Dublin's lucrative hard narcotics trade. Homes have been burned down, gang members have been shot in public throughout the day, and assassination attempts have been made several times. In one botched attempt, 2 Gucci gang members were hit by an SUV, causing catastrophic, life-altering injuries. TikTok footage of the event revealed Blanchardstown gang members taunting their injured rivals. With blood on their minds and their reputations on the line, the Gucci gang planned vengeance and reprisal. It's Christmas Eve at 8 p.m. in Brown's Steakhouse, Blanchardstown, where the festive mood is abruptly disrupted by the entrance of 2 men. One of them, 26-year-old Tristan Sherry, surveys the bustling restaurant before making his way to a booth filled with members of the infamous Blanchardstown mob. Sherry, an enforcer for the notorious Mr. Flashy, the charismatic yet brutal leader of the Gucci gang, reaches into his jacket with deliberate precision. In a split second, he brandishes a submachine gun and begins firing at the unsuspecting patrons. However, in a twist of fate, the weapon malfunctions and jams unexpectedly. Panic erupts as Gerry frantically attempts to escape the aftermath of his failed assassination. He sprints toward the rear exit, only to find, to his dismay, that the door is securely locked. Cornered like an animal, he is swiftly overwhelmed by several furious members of the Blanchardstown mob, driven by adrenaline and a desire for swift retribution. In a matter of minutes, the would-be assassin lies lifeless on the restaurant floor, stabbed nearly 30 times with a serrated steak knife, brutally struck with a heavy wooden bar stool, and shot in the head with his own firearm in a cruel twist of fate. This failed assassination attempt by Gerry and his unnamed accomplice marks yet another violent episode in the ongoing gang war that has plagued Dublin's underworld for many years. The Christmas Eve attack was carefully orchestrated by Mr. Flashy's group to showcase their strength and authority in the ongoing turf conflict. However, it resulted in complete failure, escalating the violence between these two formidable criminal organizations. Mr. Flashy, who has faced multiple assassination attempts in recent years, ultimately left Dublin and sought temporary refuge on Spain's sunny Costa del Sol, a popular hideout for Ireland's leading gangsters looking to evade law enforcement and rival assassins. Despite his efforts to stay under the radar abroad, the cycle of violence in Dublin persisted without pause. In a particularly shocking incident that even rattled seasoned police officers, Mr. Flashy's associates responded to a slight by firebombing the home of an innocent mother connected to a Blanchardstown mob member, signaling that family members had become acceptable targets in this escalating and brutal conflict. Despite the significant dangers to his safety, Mr. Flashy felt compelled to return to Dublin to take direct control of his criminal operations. In late 2022, he stealthily re-entered the city, efficiently re-establishing his influence in the northern suburbs, where his dedicated associates had upheld his interests during his time away. The attack on Brown's Steakhouse on Christmas Eve was meticulously orchestrated as a bold declaration from Mr. Flashy, a strategic move to reaffirm his authority in the ongoing turf conflict since his return. However, the assassination attempt went disastrously wrong, only intensifying the relentless cycle of revenge and violence that has plagued Dublin's underworld for years. The conflict between the Gucci gang and the Blanchardstown mob extends beyond just the drug trade. It revolves around core criminal values, dominance, control of territory, and maintaining a strong reputation. Within Dublin's underworld, respect is gained through intimidation, and Mr. Flashy's impressive ascent in the hard drug market has been strategically crafted through brutal methods, flashy exhibitions of wealth, and a relentless readiness to remove anyone who poses a threat to his position. Over the course of his criminal career, he has managed to evade several elaborate assassination attempts, skillfully avoided intense police investigations, and has cleverly utilized social media to cultivate a captivating yet perilous image. This persona draws in impressionable young individuals, luring them into his violent lifestyle with enticing promises of quick wealth and a life of luxury. As the number of bodies accumulates in morgues throughout Dublin and law enforcement focuses more on resolving this violent conflict, one question persists: how much longer can the elusive Mr. Flashy escape the grim destiny that has befallen many of his deceased Gucci gang associates? In the perilous landscape of Dublin's gang warfare, where loyalty is fleeting and betrayal is sudden, his reign at the top may be drawing to a close.
On April 4, 2020, Ireland went into lockdown. The streets are deserted, with most of the inhabitants staying indoors. However, on this peaceful Saturday, horrifying news spreads like wildfire over the country. Robbie Lawlor, a notorious mobster feared by many, has been killed. He was shot several times in the head outside a home on Etna Drive. The 36-year-old father of three emerged as the primary suspect in the murder of 17-year-old Kean Mulready Woods in Drogheda last January. Often referred to as a dead man walking, he had accumulated numerous adversaries. It was only a question of who would act first. However, what circumstances led to his brutal demise, and who was responsible for pulling the trigger? To understand how Robbie Lawlor died so violently, we must first examine his life. A young man from Coolock, Dublin, who became one of the most dreaded characters in Irish organised crime. Coolock was one of Dublin's lowest neighbourhoods, plagued by poverty, drug issues, and violence. Coolock and Darndale, for example, underwent rapid upheaval between the 1970s and 1980s. What was once farmland was converted into big housing estates in order to relocate families from the inner city's dilapidated tenement structures. Dublin officials promised the families a better life. However, many of these pledges were not followed. The neighbourhood was left without adequate support, and young people growing up there had limited opportunities to construct a brighter future. Heroin rapidly swept throughout the area, attracting organised criminals and causing widespread addiction. Many young people saw few viable routes to a better future as Coolock's crime rate rose. But there was something unique about the criminal world: money, status, and a route to success. Before pursuing more lethal careers like hitmen or enforcers, some started out as errand runners or debt collectors. Robbie Lawlor, growing up in Coolock, followed that path. He got involved in crime as a teenager and stood out early on for being unpredictable and quick to use violence. People often described him as unstable and aggressive, and he never hesitated to use force. By his late teens, he had built a name for himself as one of the city's most dangerous young criminals, someone willing to do the dirty work others avoided. That ruthlessness helped him rise quickly in Dublin's criminal underworld. Robbie Lawlor's reputation as a dangerous figure was sealed after the murder of Mark Byrne, a seasoned criminal who had clashed with Lawlor while they were both in prison. During their time behind bars, the two had a serious falling out. Byrne was more well known in Dublin's criminal world, but Lawlor, known for holding grudges, didn't let the issue go after his release. On May 5th, Byrne was given temporary release from Mountjoy Prison, where he was serving a 4-year sentence. Just 10 minutes later, as he walked through Phibsborough in Dublin, he was shot in the head and chest in a sudden and violent attack. Witnesses said Lawlor walked up to Byrne after he was already down, just to make sure he was dead, before fleeing the scene. This murder was distinct from the majority of gang-related killings. It was a personal matter rather than one of wealth, allegiance, or status. Lawlor stood out for that. He became a feared figure in Dublin's underworld after that, in addition to being a criminal. By 2010, Dublin's gang scene was changing, and Robbie Lawlor was becoming a major player. His connection to Richie Carberry, his brother-in-law and a well-known figure in organised crime, put him right in the middle of the growing feud in Drogheda. Carberry had moved to Bettystown and saw Drogheda as a prime spot to expand his drug business. Demand for cocaine skyrocketed as the town developed into a bustling commuter hub, particularly from Dubliners leaving for the weekend. Carberry capitalized on this and sought to increase his local clout. The Maguire gang dominated the drug trade in Drogheda for many years, but internal issues allowed Carberry to gain ground. He started supplying drugs and weapons to a younger crew who wanted to break free from the Maguires. Lawlor became his enforcer. Even with several stints in prison, Lawlor kept backing Carberry and used extreme violence to scare off rivals. His unpredictability made people fear him even more. In 2019, while Lawlor was serving time, Richie Carberry was shot dead. Many believed it was payback from the Maguire gang. After getting out of prison, Lawlor struck back, launching a wave of attacks on people linked to Maguire. He was even suspected of shooting Owen Maguire himself, leaving the gang leader paralyzed. Robbie Lawlor's most horrific crime happened in January 2020, and it left the country stunned. 17-year-old Kean Mulready Woods was tricked into going to a house in Drogheda where Lawlor was waiting for him. What might have started as an attempt to scare him turned into something far worse. Gardaí believe Lawlor stabbed Kean in the neck and then cut up his body. But this wasn't just about killing someone, it was a message, a warning to his enemies. Lawlor put Kean's arms and legs into a sports bag, tossed in a pair of flip-flops as a sex symbol, and dumped the bag in Coolock. Kean's hands and head were found in a burning car in Drumcondra shortly afterward. The country was astounded by its outright severity. It was more diabolical than just another gang murder. It indicated the level to which violence had developed into a terrifying situation. People in Ireland and others were shocked by what had happened. A boundary seems to have been crossed. In the months before his death, Robbie Lawlor's behavior became more reckless and unpredictable. He was constantly on the move, travelling back and forth between Ireland and Northern Ireland. In Belfast, he boldly showed up in the Cathedral Quarter, shaking down people for drug money, and even operated in Republican areas where Dublin criminals usually wouldn't dare set foot. He didn't try to stay under the radar. If anything, he seemed to enjoy the attention. He even posted on social media, bragging and mocking his enemies like he was untouchable. Around that time, Lawlor started dating a woman from a completely different world, a middle-class professional with a job in the legal field. Gardaí, worried about her safety, reached out to warn her about the kind of man she was involved with. But she told them the relationship was her choice, and even after Lawlor was suspected of playing a role in Kean's murder, she chose to stay with him. Robbie Lawlor's death came after months of careful planning by Cornelius Price, a well-known gang boss who deeply hated him. According to the Irish Mirror, Price spent over €100,000 to make the hit happen. The plan was detailed and calculated. Using contacts inside Mountjoy prison, Price reportedly tricked Lawlor into coming to Belfast by offering what seemed like a job opportunity. Price had been hiding out in the UK, worried that Lawlor might come after him for Richie Carberry's murder. To pull it all off, he teamed up with other criminal gangs to make sure nothing went wrong. Lawlor was led to a house on Etna Drive in Belfast's Ardoyne neighbourhood, not knowing that gunmen were already there, waiting. As soon as he arrived, they opened fire, killing him on the spot. Police later called it an appointment killing, a murder where the victim walked straight into the trap. At first, several well-known criminals were arrested, including members of the infamous Dundon family, but they were soon let go. Later on, Gardaí found €50,000 in cash during a surveillance operation, believed to be part of the payment for the job. Though no one was officially charged, investigators believed up to 20 people were involved in planning and carrying out the killing. The reaction to Lawlor's death was both public and swift. Just hours after the incident, Cornelius Price shared a video online, raising a toast to Lawlor's demise with a drink in hand. At the same time, Owen Maguire, the gang boss who was paralyzed by Lawlor, also posted a video celebrating his death. "What going to say, boys?" turned the head. "Now he's dead. Up, he's ho. The dirty scumbag. Long runs the fox, he got it." Robbie Lawlor's life wasn't just a string of crimes. It was a warning sign that no one paid attention to until it was too late. He grew up in Coolock, one of the toughest parts of Dublin, where poverty, drugs, and violence were part of the everyday. From a young age, the odds were stacked against him. There weren't many chances to build a better life. What made him stand out wasn't just that he was violent. Plenty of people in that world are. It was how far he was willing to go. He didn't care about the consequences. He acted on impulse, on rage, on revenge. He hurt people not just to send a message, but sometimes because he wanted to. And yet, for all the fear he spread, Lawlor didn't die in some grand, dramatic fashion. He was lured to a house in Belfast and gunned down before he even saw it coming. It was quick, quiet, inevitable. By then, he had burned too many bridges, made too many enemies. Everyone knew it was only a matter of time. But the sad truth is, his death didn't fix anything. The violence didn't stop. The pain didn't end. The turf wars he helped spark are still going. New names are taking his place. New kids are getting pulled into the same mess he came from, chasing money, respect, survival, because they still don't see another way out. Robbie Lawlor's story isn't one to glamorize. It's one to learn from. Because as long as kids grow up in places where violence feels like the only option, there will always be another Lawlor waiting to take his place. Dublin's streets have long been echoed by tales of treachery, revenge, and people who left their mark on the world with blood. But among the numerous tales of power and retaliation, one individual stands out. Not because of his sins or the enemies he has made, but because of something much more amazing: his extraordinary ability to survive. Stay tuned as we uncover the remarkable tale of a man who has defied death 7 times. The one who has outwitted fate itself. The person referred to in Dublin's underworld as Mickey 9 Lives. In the early 2000s, Dublin was a city where a calm street might suddenly turn into a battlefield. The criminal scene was changing, with new conflicts emerging in the shadowy areas of the city and partnerships breaking up. Violence was not merely a possibility, it was an inevitability. Lives were being lost and names were being erased from existence. At the center of this turmoil stood a man well versed in the dangerous game, Michael Fraser. His name was murmured in pubs, dreaded in shadowy alleys, and recognized by both criminals and the Gardaí. He wasn't a kingpin, but he represented a distinct kind of threat. A loyalist, an enforcer, a man willing to fight and kill for people he believed to be his pals. Fraser has significant ties to the criminal underworld in Dublin. He began his career as a teenage foot soldier in Brian Rattigan's gang, which was notorious for its violent clashes with rivals in the Crumlin-Drimnagh region. However, in the world of gangs, loyalty is often fleeting. As power moves like grains of sand, people who used to stand shoulder to shoulder could quickly become bitter foes. Fraser decided to join Fat Freddie Thompson and quit Rattigan's side at a pivotal moment. Because the fight between Rattigan and Thompson was so personal and went beyond simple territorial disputes or financial gain, this decision had considerably more ramifications than Rattigan had expected. Changing allegiances meant one thing in a vicious feud where the animosities never went away. Fraser had become a target. Fraser was no longer only an ordinary soldier. He was now viewed as a traitor by one faction and a valued comrade by another. The dangerous world of Dublin's gangs is one where betrayal often leads to violence. The initial attempt on his life was just the beginning of a perilous journey filled with near-fatal experiences. It was clear from each assassination plot that someone was determined to get rid of him for good. However, Dublin's underworld had come to understand one crucial fact about Michael Fraser. He was a challenging man to kill. The pursuit of Mickey 9 lives has been unrelenting. He has been ambushed by assassins in the shadows. He has been torn by bullets. But he has often come out of it unharmed. There is no logical explanation for his survival or reason for his continued existence. A man like him, so deeply involved in a ruthless conflict devoid of compassion, should have met his demise long ago. And yet, here he remains, observing, anticipating, always evading the clutches of death. The first notable incident occurred on March 26, 2014, in a secluded parking lot near the Church of the Transfiguration in Clondalkin. It was clearly a planned attack. Someone had anticipated his presence. The assailant lay in wait, concealed in the shadows. As soon as Fraser exited his vehicle, gunfire erupted. He collapsed to the ground, his clothes drenched in blood. Despite being shot twice, he was determined to fight back. Instead of seeking assistance, Fraser did what few would dare. He pulled himself back into his car and drove off. Not to a hospital or a friend's house, but directly to the Clondalkin Garda station, his hands stained with blood on the steering wheel. However, when the officers rushed to his aid, he remained tight-lipped. He offered no names, no specifics, and no willingness to cooperate. He even denied the police access to his hospital medical records. This lack of cooperation forced the authorities to conduct their own investigation to crack the case. Fortunately for them, they got a lead. The shooter who targeted Fraser was identified as James Nellie Walsh, a young member of Thompson's crew. In a bizarre twist, Walsh accidentally shot himself in the leg while trying to escape, leaving behind crucial forensic evidence. Within a few months, he was apprehended and faced charges. To circumvent a lengthy trial, he ultimately accepted a plea deal for possession of a firearm with intent to endanger life, resulting in the more serious attempted murder charge against Fraser being dismissed. Walsh was sentenced to 10 years in prison for the failed assassination attempt. 5 months later, they returned for him. This time, it was in the shadowy parking lot of a pub in Fir House, Tallard, on August 1st, 2014. The scene was set perfectly. A masked assailant rushed in, gun drawn. It seemed like an effortless execution. Yet fate, or perhaps mere chance, had other plans. As the trigger was squeezed, the gun malfunctioned. That brief moment of uncertainty was all Fraser required. He sprinted away, disappearing into the darkness before the assailant could take another shot. CCTV footage recorded the whole incident. The masked figure retreating, the weapon in hand, a lethal instrument that had failed at the most critical moment. But once again, Fraser chose silence. No names were revealed. no comments made, no assistance offered. In May 2017, gunmen assaulted Michael Fraser's home in Drimnagh, South Dublin. Under the cover of night, a vehicle raced past Fraser's residence, and at least one assailant opened fire with a handgun, showering the property with bullets. A total of 7 shots struck the house, but fortunately, neither Fraser nor anyone else was injured. All evidence pointed to Fat Freddie Thompson, an old friend turned adversary of Fraser. Subsequent reports indicated that Thompson, who had recently been released from a 20-month prison sentence for violent disorder, was personally involved in this act of revenge. There were whispers of an unresolved personal conflict between Thompson and Fraser that had lingered for years. Moreover, Thompson's situation had changed. He was now closely associated with the Kinahan cartel's efforts against the Hutch family and had access to numerous willing gunmen. It appears Thompson utilized these resources to target Fraser. The true question extends far beyond his simple survival. It explores the factors that led to his original death sentence. What traits did this man have that made him a target for persistent assassins? More importantly, how many lives does he have remaining? Michael Fraser's life had been under constant threat, but a significant breakthrough finally emerged. The arrest and conviction of Stephen Dunn and Gary Gleeson in August 2017 marked more than just another incident in gang-related crime. It established the first concrete connection between Fraser and the shadowy forces that had been pursuing him for years. In Dublin's criminal underbelly, silence was paramount. However, when Gardaí discovered a covert recording from an interception on the N3 road, the truth began to surface. For the first time, it became evident that these attacks were not random acts of violence. Fraser was not merely another target on a hit list, he was the primary target. A powerful individual wanted him eliminated, someone willing to finance professional assassins, supply weapons, and ensure that every shot was lethal. The trial of Stephen Dunn and Gary Gleeson has unveiled disturbing revelations about a planned execution amid Dublin's Gangland conflict, prosecutors stated. The men were on their way to execute a hit on Michael Fraser when Gardaí stepped in. Investigators suspected that this murder-for-hire scheme was orchestrated by high-ranking criminal figures who remain at large. In the courtroom, the prosecution unveiled their most incriminating evidence, a secret recording made inside the hitman's vehicle. The haunting phrase that sealed their doom was clear: aim for the head, headshots, or we don't get paid. The case against Dunn and Gleeson was undeniably strong. They had been apprehended with a loaded gun, gloves, and a meticulously crafted execution plan. Their defense was a feeble claim that they were just driving around, a rationale that crumbled under examination. The judge wasted no time in delivering a verdict. Both men received prison sentences, representing a rare triumph for law enforcement in a city where murderers frequently evaded justice. But even with this legal triumph, there was still a crucial question: who had planned the hit? Speculation grew very intense behind the scenes. Fraser's opponents, according to the Gardaí, were some of Dublin's most powerful crime lords, not just small-time offenders. Then there was the most significant theory of all. Had Fraser inadvertently crossed paths with the Kinahan cartel? The Kinahan cartel, notorious for their brutality, is one of Europe's most feared crime organizations. Their influence extended far beyond Ireland, encompassing drug trafficking, money laundering, and contract killings. Whispers suggested that Fraser had either unknowingly or deliberately encroached on their territory. If this were true, it would clarify the relentless assaults against him. Unlike smaller gangs, the Kinahans did not issue warnings. When they targeted someone, they pursued their objective until it was achieved. By the time Dunn and Gleeson were imprisoned, Fraser had survived 6 assassination attempts. 6 times he had narrowly escaped death, but the 7th attempt would prove to be the most perilous of all. The year was 2019, and Dublin's streets were eerily silent. Then, in the stillness of the night, a hit squad was sent out once again. This time, there would be no room for mistakes. The assassins had a single directive: complete the mission. Michael Fraser had escaped death 6 times by this time. It took a combination of street smarts, timing, and instincts honed by years of negotiating the perilous terrain of Dublin's gang wars to survive that many assassination attempts. it was not just luck. The seventh attempt unfolded on a tranquil evening in Dublin. Fraser had grown increasingly vigilant. He switched vehicles often, seldom lingered in one location, and always surveyed his surroundings before moving. Yet this time, his adversaries had adapted to their past failures. 2 gunmen, 2 firearms, no margin for error. As Fraser exited his car, the assailants appeared. The first bullet hit him in the side, the second skimmed his shoulder, and a third shattered the glass behind him. Most men would have crumpled at that moment, but not Fraser. He took off running. Despite the blood flowing from his wounds, he pressed on. He understood the stakes. If you go down, they complete the job. With every bit of determination, he vanished into the darkness. By the time the Gardaí arrived, all that remained were shell casings and blood on the ground. The shooters had failed, and once again, Michael Fraser had narrowly escaped death. At this juncture, the media had dubbed him Mickey 9 Lives. This was more than just a moniker. It was a brand. And with that brand came repercussions. Some viewed him as invincible, while others considered him a target still in play. However, after the 7th assassination attempt, a shift occurred. The streets fell silent. The chatter of another hit dwindled. Then rumors began to circulate that Fraser had settled matters. After surviving multiple assassination attempts in 2017, Michael Fraser chose to keep a low profile. Incredibly, in the years that followed, he outlived many of the dangerous figures from the underworld who once threatened him. One of these was Fat Freddie Thompson, who had been a key player in the plots against Fraser. However, Thompson's downfall came not at Fraser's hands, but due to his involvement in a different conflict. In August 2018, he was convicted of murder for his part in the death of David Douglas, a member of the Hutch gang, and received a life sentence. With Thompson imprisoned for life, Fraser was rid of one of his most vengeful adversaries. Additionally, the Kinahan Cartel, another significant threat, also suffered major blows during this period. Although the cartel's leaders, including Daniel Kinahan, remained elusive overseas, their operations in Dublin were heavily impacted by police interventions and the ongoing Hutch feud, leading to the capture of several key hitmen and lieutenants. James Nellie Walsh, the hitman responsible for shooting Fraser in March 2014, spent a significant portion of the decade incarcerated due to that failed assignment. He was released around 2022, but quickly found himself in trouble once more. In a twist of fate, Walsh became the target of assassination attempts from rival criminals and narrowly escaped a machine gun attack shortly after his release from prison. Paul Rice, the seasoned gangster who had previously opposed Fraser, also faded into obscurity. Although less documented, by the late 2000s and into the 2010s, Rice was an aging figure facing health challenges and stepping back from active gang life. He no longer seemed to pose a threat to Fraser. By around 2019, Mickey 9 Lives found himself in an unexpected position. He had survived the chaos. As of 2025, Michael is thought to be alive, now in his mid to late 40s, and still leading the quiet life he embraced in recent years. Publicly, he remains a mysterious figure. Those who know the Dublin gang scene suggest that Fraser has aged out of the game. After decades in the underworld and numerous close calls with death, he seems satisfied to remain out of the limelight. On the 24th of December 2023, a 26-year-old member of Ireland's infamous Gucci gang walked into Brown's Steakhouse in Blanchardstown, Dublin. Armed with an automatic pistol, the young guy had his eyes set on his target, 47-year-old Jason Hennessy Sr., a member of the rival Hennessy gang. Unfortunately, things did not end well for both individuals as they lost their lives tragically amidst the shootout. This is the bone-chilling story of Tristan Sherry, a Gucci gang member from Finglas who lost his life shortly after fatally shooting Jason Hennessy. It was Christmas Eve, and Jason Hennessy was in Brown's Steakhouse enjoying dinner. At around 8 p.m, Tristan walked in with a gun in his hand, looking keenly for Jason. He was there to seal his fate, probably because of a gang-related feud. However, he had no idea that he would meet his end in the very same place. As soon as he saw Jason, he opened fire. The entire restaurant was engulfed in a state of panic, while people with their wives and kids tried to hide under the tables. When he realized that he had hit the target, he tried to escape from a locked door. However, there was no way out for him now. Tristan was stopped within a few seconds of opening fire, and he was stuck in the restaurant with the man he shot and his guards. Jason Hennessy had already taken bullets to his neck and chest as he lay on the floor, struggling to breathe. Meanwhile, his guards took control of Tristan, putting him on the floor and beating him mercilessly. Eyewitnesses and coroners later reported that Shirley was disarmed, beaten, and stabbed at least 30 times, all to the point where he lost his life. Instantly, the Gardaí, the National Police of Ireland, reached the crime scene and detectives took over. Everything in the steakhouse was a piece of evidence related to the horrendous crime that took place. Therefore, it was imperative that nothing be touched or moved. After their preliminary investigation, the detectives said that the steakhouse attack on Jason Hennessy could be spontaneous. However, some hinted that Sherry's Gangland associates may have encouraged him to carry out the attack. The police also reported that Jason Hennessy was in a vegetative state and he was shifted to Dublin's Connolly Hospital immediately. But unfortunately, it was already too late. As he reached the hospital, Jason lost his life due to the gunshot wounds. And from this point onwards, the downfall of Dublin's most notorious criminal gang, the Hennessy Gang, began. The Hennessy Gang operated under the guise of various legitimate businesses such as a towing company by the name of Hulk Recovery. They used this dual identity to maintain respect in society while operating their illegal businesses behind the scenes. The Gucci Gang, on the other hand, rose to fame in Finglas, North Dublin. The leader of this gang was Glenn, who also went by the name of Mr. Flashy. They were notoriously known for flashy lifestyles and violent acts, primarily because the gang had direct ties to the Kinahan Cartel. This affiliation with one of the most powerful organizations in Ireland gave them the power to expand their business in the Hennessy Gang territory. Despite knowing the severe consequences of taking over another rival gang's territory, the Gucci Gang made their move. Because of that, tensions arose between the two groups, leading to various violent attacks on each other. By 2019, this feud increased to the point where a daylight shootout occurred in Coolock, and it was captured on CCTV. Retaliatory attacks kept taking place, and several members from each group were injured. However, they never reached a peace agreement. Police patrols, surveillance, and plans to intercept their criminal activities kept increasing, but the gang members never backed down. Because of that, many have assumed that Sherry entered the steakhouse and attacked the Hennessy Gang leader as a power move. The Gucci Gang wanted to show that they were more powerful than their rivals, and this was the perfect opportunity. However, they had no idea that they would also lose one of their own in the crossfire. Nonetheless, their main goal of bringing down the Hennessy Gang was achieved. On 5th January 2024, just a couple of weeks after the shooting, Jason Hennessy Sr. lost his life on the hospital bed. He had gunshot wounds in his neck and upper torso, which led to a lot of blood loss. Despite fighting for his life for 11 days, his organs eventually gave up, leading to his demise. After this news became public, the Hennessy Gang's era came to an end. A power vacuum was left in Dublin's criminal underworld, and the Gucci Gang wanted to fill this gap. However, because of the police investigations into the double murder, making any move right now was impossible. The Irish police had launched a comprehensive citywide investigation into the incident. CCTV footage from the steakhouse was recovered, which clearly showed the shootout taking place as the customers tried to hide themselves under tables and behind chairs. Another video, recorded by a person inside the steakhouse, showed a lifeless body on the floor with blood all around. This horrifying scene showed how gruesome the shooting was and how traumatic it would have been for the customers inside with their families. Following the CCTV footage and the accounts of witnesses, the Irish police force focused their investigation on identifying another gunman who entered with Sherry. They also wanted to find any masterminds behind this plan because that would make the case easier to solve. Finding the motive and the perpetrators behind this attack was imperative. Unfortunately, after weeks of investigations, the police had no idea who was behind the shooting of Jason Hennessy. One gunman had been eliminated on the spot, while the other one was nowhere to be found. But this didn't mean that the case was over. It was still a double homicide, and finding the men who mercilessly took the life of Tristan Sherry, was equally important. The first order of business was to identify who the second man was with Tristan Sherry. Legal action had already been taken, and 6 men, including the son of Jason Hennessy, were put on trial in a non-jury court in November 2024. During the court hearings, Detective Garda Chris Durant told the prosecutor Fiona Murphy that when he reached the scene, he saw a dark-coloured Hyundai Tucson take off at speed towards the roundabout for the N3 and M50. The detective then walked into the restaurant, where he saw a body surrounded by blood, while members of the Dublin Fire Brigade attended to it. Unfortunately, no one ever found out who the second man was who entered with Sherry. However, the silver lining was that out of the 6 arrested men, 5 confessed to being rightly identified in the CCTV footage played in court. Michael Andrecutt of Sheep Hill Avenue, Blanchardstown, was seen kicking Sherry several times as he lay on the ground. He used a butter knife to stab him repeatedly and also hit him with a chair. He then smashed 2 glasses over his head before pausing for a moment. Seconds later, he started attacking Sherry again and took pictures of assaulting him with his mobile phone. David Amar, a 19-year-old teenager of Hazel Grove, Donabat, also pushed through the crowd surrounding Sherry to stomp on him repeatedly. The CCTV footage also showed Amar stabbing Sherry and hitting him with a chair. Just like Andrecutt, Amar also used his mobile phone to record the attack and make videos of himself while mercilessly stomping and stabbing Sherry. Another teenager, who was a juvenile at the time, ran to the bathroom as soon as the 2 gunmen, including Sherry, entered the restaurant. However, after a few moments, he returned and helped move the wounded body of Jason Hennessy Sr. When he returned to the restaurant, the CCTV footage captured him stabbing Sherry and stamping on his head. According to the reports, the unnamed juvenile stabbed Sherry at least 10 times. Joris Kumbu, a 19-year-old from Brookhaven Grove, Blanchardstown, was also seen picking up Sherry's weapon from a table and leaving the restaurant. To date, the weapon, which was used to eliminate Jason Hennessy Sr., has not been found. However, Joris Kumbu was arrested and put on trial. And lastly, Noah Musweni, an 18-year-old from Corduff Park, Blanchardstown, was also accused of taking the life of Tristan Sherry. All of the accused pleaded not guilty in the special criminal court, but the evidence against them was too strong. The trial went on for months before the judge reached a verdict. In February 2025, 3 men, Michael Andrecutt, David Amar, and Noah Musweni, were found guilty of taking the life of Tristan Sherry on Christmas Eve in 2023. The court awarded all 3 mandatory life sentences. However, since David Amar and Noah Musweni were both 17 at the time of the crime, the mandatory life sentences did not apply. Their sentencing details are pending with considerations for their age at the time of the offence. 4 others, including Joris Kumbu, Brandon Hennessy, Jonas Kabangu, and Diarmuid O'Brien, were also convicted of violent disorder. Joris Kumbu was sentenced to 2 years in February 2025, whereas the sentences of the remaining 3 are still pending. After the sentences were handed over, the Irish police also carried out a massive crackdown against the Gucci Gang and Mr. Flashy. In April 2025, he was sentenced to 5.5 years in prison for firing an AR-15 rifle at a house party in 2022. His younger brother, Eric O'Driscoll, also received a 5-year prison sentence for using the same weapon. Both the Gucci Gang and the Hennessy Gang have been taken down now. Their leaders are in prison or resting eternally. The Irish police say that the imprisonment of Glenn Ward and the fall of the Hennessy Gang is a significant victory for law enforcement and their fight against organised crime in Dublin. But despite the gangs being taken down, the shooting of Christmas Eve in 2023 has left a significant impact on Dublin's residents. They say that these deaths are the prime example of Dublin's ongoing struggle with gang violence. It's a brutal reality, one that has devastating effects on the local communities. Gunfire erupts at the Regency Hotel in Dublin on February 5, 2016, as masked men storm into a crowded boxing weigh-in. They pretend to be police and wave AK-47s around, looking for cartel boss Daniel Kinahan. He evades capture, but his friend David Byrne is discovered dead in the lobby. The city is shocked at the brazen attack, and eyes turn to one man, Gerry the Monk Hutch, a notorious criminal who has a history of robberies and strict rules that helped spark a violent feud. Was he the one behind it all, or just caught up in the bloodshed? This is his story, from the tough streets of Dublin to a courtroom showdown. Gerry Hutch was born on April 11, 1963, in Dublin's North Inner City, a place hit hard by poverty and joblessness. His parents, Patrick, a dock worker, and Julia, a stay-at-home mother caring for a large family, brought him up. Gerry grew up in a small public housing flat, where getting by often meant bending the rules. In the 1970s, a heroin epidemic swept the neighborhood, leaving families in crisis and the streets littered with abandoned syringes. For a boy like Gerry, the environment was both risk and opportunity, an influence that would chart his life. As a teenager, Gerry started getting into trouble with the law, beginning a long history of crime. By his teenage years, he was part of a group of local lads, committing small thefts and robberies off Dublin's back streets, learning skills that would later mold his profession. These early crimes were more about surviving than being greedy, in a time when even food and clothes were hard to get. Gerry later said his family was so poor that it was first up, best dressed, with kids fighting over hand-me-down clothes. In the 1970s, Dublin's youth justice system kept sending Gerry in and out of trouble. He had numerous convictions for offences like joyriding, assault, burglary, and theft by his mid-teens. He spent time in St. Patrick's Institution for Young Offenders, and later in Mountjoy Prison, Dublin's main prison for adults. These institutions were hard, but Gerry adapted, referring to his prison experience as a university of crime. He taught himself to read using comic books and by watching how older criminals around him acted. Above all, he observed how they worked, learning discipline, planning, and silence, skills that would stand him in good stead in the criminal underworld. Surrounded by experienced criminals, Gerry learned to move from small-time crime to bigger jobs. At the age of 17, he was committing armed robberies, often with machine guns. While his friends spent their money or became addicted, Gerry was sober and calculating. He considered drugs to be poison, ruining his neighborhood and clouding his judgment. This clear head gave him an edge, earning respect from other criminals and making rivals fear him. By 1980, at the age of 20, Gerry had established himself in Dublin's underworld. He bought his first home for £10,000 in cash, a large sum for a man of his background. Leading a tight group of armed robbers, Gerry planned bigger and riskier heists. It all came unstuck on January 25, 1987, when Gerry's gang staged one of Ireland's most outrageous robberies. In the Fairview area of Dublin, they robbed a Securicor van carrying £1.3 million in bank cash. They had followed the van for months and knew its route down to the minute. A stolen red BMW overtook the van at Marino Mart, and 3 masked gangsters jumped out with guns in hand. They forced the 2 Securicor guards out of the van, hijacked it, and drove it to a deserted area nearby. Inside, they discovered many bags containing £25,000 each. There was so much money that they even grabbed a few extra bags on the way out in the rush to leave. The van was left there, and the gang vanished into Dublin's streets. The Marino Mart robbery shocked the country and was called Ireland's biggest cash heist at the time. The police were swift to act, but Gerry's preparations paid off, and they were unsuccessful. The robbery left a big mark. It even led to armed guards being added to vans carrying over £1 million. The robbery was a triumph for Gerry, and he put himself on par with other notorious criminals like Martin Cahill, known as the General. People saw Gerry as careful and fearless. His name was mentioned with both respect and fear.
At 5:30 p.m. on the 26th of January 1987, 3 armed and masked men held up and stole over £1.3 million from a Securicor cash-in-transit van outside the Bank of Ireland at Marino Mart in Fairview in Dublin. Gerard Hutch says he wasn't involved, and yet £75,000 from that robbery ended up in his Northern Ireland bank account.
As Gerry's fortune increased, he began to invest. He bought several homes and apartments in Dublin's inner city. These deals helped hide his illegal money and made it look clean. By the late 1980s, he was not only an inner-city street criminal, but a smart player in the underworld. He stood out by staying away from drugs, being careful, and not trusting many people, unlike others who ended up in jail. In January 1995, Gerry was said to have masterminded another record heist on the Brinks Allied Cash Depot in Clondalkin, close to Dublin Airport. This robbery brought in £2.8 million, more than the Marino Mart job. Gerry's gang spent months getting insider tips, watching security routines, and planning their move. They cut through fences, broke barriers, and even built a quick escape bridge across a ditch. 2 hijacked jeeps screamed into the depot on the evening of the heist. Armed with AK-47s and handguns, the gang broke into the loading area, fired warning shots to scare off the guards, and grabbed bags of cash. In minutes, they disappeared into the night. The Brinks robbery shocked Ireland, not just because it was huge, but because it was planned like a military operation. Gardaí were certain Gerry was the mastermind, but no evidence or witnesses linked him directly to the robbery. The stolen money was never found and was probably hidden in building projects during Ireland's building boom. The robbery turned Gerry into a legend, a thief who could outsmart the authorities and escape scot-free.
It may have been business as usual for workers at the Brinks Allied security firm today, but behind the scenes in the rear of the building, Gardaí forensic experts were trying to piece together how 5 men last night carried out one of the most daring robberies in the state's history. It was a meticulously planned raid with a good deal of preparatory work carried out in advance. The gang had cut saplings, removed bolts and sawn through fittings to gain access through the outer fence. They had also laid a bridge of planks across a ditch to facilitate their entry and exit.
Obviously we don't want to go into detail about what we do operationally, but I don't think the question really deserves an answer in the sense if we knew that this was going to happen, we would have done something about it.
Could I ask you about likely suspects at this stage? There's been some talk of a North Dublin inner city gang.
Sorry, Chief Superintendent, would you?
Yes, well, in relation to that, I would say we have an open mind. We're obviously looking at various groups, but we haven't excluded any particular person or group from our inquiries at the moment.
Would it be correct Chief to say Superintendent leading the investigation?
I know all about it. I've been arrested, questioned about it, I've been written about. That happened in 95. I thought it was 96. It was 95. 13 years ago.
£2.8 million.
Yeah.
The biggest robbery in the history of the state at the time.
Yeah.
You say you know all about it. Tell us about it.
I've read all about it in the newspapers. That's what I know about it. And any time it's written about, my photograph is thrown in. They released me at the end of the day.
Well, they had to because they had no evidence on you, because it was such a well-planned job.
No, if you've no evidence on something, it's obviously you didn't do it.
No, it's not obvious you didn't do it.
You know, if everyone knows you've done it, like, everyone knows you've done it, there has to be stuff to back it up.
While building his criminal empire, Gerry also shaped a public image that seemed very different. When Dublin had a serious drug problem in the 1990s, he was regarded as an anti-drug dealer. He marched with residents demanding action against drug dealers. He founded the Corinthians Boxing Club in Summerhill in 1998, purchasing the premises and establishing it with a fully equipped gym and a donated boxing ring from director Jim Sheridan after his film The Boxer. Gerry filled his evenings coaching young boxers to keep them out of crime. Parents and community leaders accepted him, and many locals regarded him as a Robin Hood figure who assisted his poor neighbourhood. Gerry was nicknamed the Monk by journalist Harry McGee because of his dual existence as a criminal mastermind and a benefactor to the community. He earned the name because he lived simply, no flashy cars, drugs, or focus and hard work. He stopped fights, gave people money, and ensured they stayed loyal to him. His criminal existence, however, soon caught attention. In 1997, the new Criminal Assets Bureau focused on Gerry, probing his untold wealth. After a long investigation, they charged him a £1.5 million tax bill for 9 years of undeclared income, saying that his income came from robberies like Marino Mart and Brinks. Gerry dismissed the allegations, saying his funds resulted from genuine property transactions. In 1999, he struck a deal with the Criminal Assets Bureau for £1.2 million and even dropped off £500,000 in cash inside a sports bag, a bold move that became famous. This deal kept him out of prison and let him keep most of his money. He used it to finally get a taxi license, which he had earlier denied, and started a limo business called Carry Anybody, a joking name. The company brought in stretch Hummers from the US and drove famous people around, which kept Gerry in the spotlight. By the early 2000s, Gerry had effectively brought his life of crime to a close. He split his time between Dublin and a holiday home in Lanzarote. He concentrated on property investments and his limousine company, living a quiet life with his wife Patricia and his 5 children. His family went out of their way to deny his criminality, with some of them having professional careers. It looked like Gerry was about to do what most crime bosses couldn't, walk away free, rich and clean. But the criminal world he had left behind was changing. Christy Kinahan Sr., the Dapper Don, and his Kinahan clan were rising to power. From Spain's Costa del Sol, the Kinahans established an international narcotics cartel, supplying cocaine to Ireland and the UK. Christy's sons, Daniel and Christopher, took over, with Daniel becoming a hard man. The Kinahans' rise was tied to the Hutch family through business and family ties, setting the stage for war. Gerry's nephew, Gary Hutch, was a key figure in this scenario. Gary was in his early 20s when he went to prison for armed robbery, serving 6 years and befriending members of Fat Freddie Thompson's gang. After his release, he travelled to the Costa del Sol in 2008, operating with his childhood friend Patty Doyle in the Kinahan cartel's drug trade. In 2009, Gary made money from a £7.6 million Bank of Ireland robbery, the biggest cash robbery in Irish history. He held a bank worker's family hostage overnight and forced him to bring the money to a train station in Dublin. Gary took a cut of that money and put it back into the Kinahan business, gaining more power. But Gary had a falling out with Daniel Kinahan. He felt ignored and unappreciated, even though he'd helped him. In 2014, he became extremely enraged and planned to assassinate Daniel at a Spanish villa. The gunman, however, accidentally shot Jamie Moore, a British boxing trainer, but he survived. This failed hit ruined Gary's standing in the cartel. He brokered a deal to pay the Kinahans €200,000 to keep him alive, but it fell through. On September 8, 2015, Gerry was invited to a meeting at an apartment building near Marbella. Instead, he was ambushed and shot several times in a premeditated murder. Gary's killing shocked the Hutch family and drew Gerry back into crime. The Kinahans struck again in December 2015, sending 2 hitmen to a pub in Lanzarote to try to kill Gerry. He had left just minutes earlier, escaping by chance. That attack made things personal and locked both families into a cycle of violence. Gerry, who had lived in exile for years, was now a target in a war he couldn't escape. On February 5, 2016, 2 gangs got into a shootout at the Regency Hotel that made major headlines. The hotel was packed for the Clash of the Clans boxing event, with fighters, their teams and reporters all around. A silver Ford Transit van arrived at 2:30 p.m. 5 men jumped out. A young guy in a blonde wig and a man in a flat cap, both carrying handguns, and 3 more in tactical gear holding AK-47s. They stormed into the lobby, opened fire and sent people diving for cover. They were targeting Daniel Kinahan, but he managed to escape. David Byrne, one of his best friends, did not fare so well and was the target of a hail of bullets. The attackers fled in a van, which was later found burnt out in a local area. The Regency shooting was unlike anything Dublin had seen. It happened in broad daylight and was caught on camera. It looked more like a military raid than a normal gang hit. The police instantly suspected Gerry's involvement, thinking he orchestrated the attack in retaliation for Gary's murder. Police surveillance showed him meeting with key people, including Jonathan Dowdall, a former Sinn Féin councillor, and Shane Rowan, an IRA member. Rowan was later arrested with 3 AK-47s that turned out to be the same weapons used in the attack, linking them back to Gerry's group. The Kinahans acted quickly. On February 8, 2016, Gerry's older brother, Eddie Hutch, a harmless taxi driver, was gunned down outside his apartment on North Strand Road. The murder sent a clear message: no member of the Hutch family was safe. In the next 2 years, the feud claimed at least 18 lives, most of them connected to the Hutch side. Victims included Gerry's nephew Gareth Hutch, who was gunned down outside his home in 2016, and close friend Noel King-sized Duggan, who was killed in County Meath. Innocent bystanders were also harmed. Trevor O'Neill, a Dublin City Council staff member, was unjustly killed in Mallorca. Martin O'Rourke, 24, was shot on Sheriff Street after being mistaken for a Hutch supporter. As more people were killed, officials tried to stop the bloodshed. Gardaí said they wanted Gerry to talk to the Kinahans, but he declined, stating, "There's no going back. I've nothing to lose." The streets of Dublin were a battleground, and the violence made headlines, revealing the brutal truth of Ireland's underworld. The Regency attack placed gang crime on the front pages, destroying the illusion that crime was hidden. police launched a full investigation into the Regency shooting, determined to get Gerry into custody. In April 2021, prosecutors charged him with murder and issued a European arrest warrant. Gerry hid and moved between safe houses in Spain, Turkey, and other countries. He was renowned for evading capture, but his good fortune ended on August 24, 2021. Spanish police caught him at a restaurant in Ferrol, ending years of running. On September 29th, he was flown back to Ireland on a military plane, surrounded by armed officers. Back in Dublin, Gerry was brought to court and charged with David Byrne's murder. He stayed in jail while awaiting trial at the Special Criminal Court, a court with no jury that handles organised crime cases to avoid threats or pressure on jurors. The trial started on October 18, 2022, and it quickly became a major event. Gerry denied the charges, as did co-accused Paul Murphy and Jason Bonney, who were charged with providing vehicles for the attack. A key witness in the trial was Jonathan Dowdall, the former Sinn Féin councillor who agreed to testify for the state. Dowdall had faced murder charges too, but made a deal, saying he helped by booking a hotel room for the attackers. He claimed Gerry told him during a park meeting that he feared the violence would spiral and be caught on CCTV and shown by the media. Dowdall said Gerry was in charge, but defence lawyers said Dowdall was lying to save himself. The prosecution showed CCTV clips, played taped conversations between Gerry and Dowdall, and linked the AK-47s to Gerry's group of friends. But most cases were based on indirect clues, not hard proof. After 13 weeks of trial, on April 17, 2023, the court gave its verdict. Gerry was found not guilty. The judges said there wasn't enough evidence to prove he planned the attack. Murphy and Bonney were found guilty of helping with the murder by supplying cars. The result shocked the country and sparked arguments about organised crime and justice. A few days later, things got even messier when a Garda investigator resigned after reportedly going to a party with Gerry on April 19th, raising eyebrows and trust issues. Gerry retreated to a less noisy life, but his story continued. In 2024, he ran as an independent candidate in Dublin Central for the general election. He ran on local issues and charmed voters, but did not get a seat.
Do you have any reaction, Gerry, after you've been cleared of the murder of David Byrne? Do you have any reaction, Gerry?
Hutch's story is about survival, ambition, and standing firm. He went from a teenage burglar to masterminding million-pound heists and built a hard reputation for himself through determination and brains. His social endeavours made him respected, but his crimes made him feared. The war between the Kinahan and Hutch families began with betrayal and revenge, with Dublin wounded and Gerry caught in a conflict he couldn't escape. Like his life, his not guilty verdict split opinions, a sign of a man who lived between being a hero and a villain, now part of Ireland's criminal legend. In 2019, Dublin's north side areas of Coolock and Darndale experienced a surge of gang violence. In just 1 week in May, the community was rocked by the murders of 2 young men in related incidents. Now, years later, a Dublin court trial has finally lifted the lid on its origins, with a drug debt, a betrayal, and a chain of revenge that would turn local criminals against each other. This video will explore how a significant drug debt resulted in a brutal daytime killing, and the lengthy 6-year pursuit of justice that ensued. At the heart of the story is 22-year-old Jordan Davis, a small-time drug dealer and young dad from Darndale. Jordan found himself in deep trouble with a huge drug debt owed to a more experienced criminal. Evidence later presented in court revealed that he was referred to as Jordo on his supplier's debt lists, which tracked drug debts. The list discovered by the Gardaí showed Jordo owing a staggering €153,000 at one point. Even after making some payments, a later entry still indicated he had €70,000 left to pay, marked with not yet, showing the significant amount he still owed. Jordan's debts were to Robert Rue Redmond, a notorious criminal in Dublin's underworld. Redmond, in his late 30s, was a veteran gangster with 99 previous convictions, including armed assaults, extortion, and even a murder charge. He had been supplying drugs to younger dealers like Jordan on credit, anticipating big returns. However, when Jordan started falling behind on his payments, Redmond's patience wore thin. By the end of 2018, tensions were rising between them as Jordan struggled to settle his debts, making the situation increasingly perilous. By the end of 2018, things had taken a dangerous turn. In testimony given years later, Jordan's mother, Sandra Davis, described how the threats against her son escalated. Just after Christmas 2018, 2 men showed up at her family home in Coolock looking for Jordan. One was a huge man with dark hair and a beard, known by the nickname Smithser, and the other was Jordan's close friend, 22-year-old Sean Little. Little was someone Sandra knew from the neighborhood. Now he was standing in her living room, doing all the talking, and he was furious. Sean Little and Smithser, later identified as Cowlan Smith, a notorious cartel hitman, told Sandra that Jordan owed them 120,000 euros in total, an enormous sum, and they weren't leaving without the money. Little was enraged, calling Jordan a little and warning Sandra that if the debt wasn't paid, your son is going to be getting buried with your daughter. He didn't hold back on the threats either, warning that if the debt wasn't paid, she would be identifying Jordan in a coffin. When Sandra tried to reach Jordan, he replied with a text saying he was in the hospital, an obvious lie that only made Little angrier. Eventually, Cowlan Smith intervened to de-escalate, telling Little, "Leave it there, we should get out of here," and assuring Sandra that if she promised to talk sense into her son, they'd give Jordan a chance to sort it out. Before leaving, Smith told her, "I'm taking your word that you will sort this out." With that, the 2 gangsters drove off into the night, leaving Sandra shaken and furious with her son. After everything that happened, Jordan made an effort to pay off some of his debt. He promised to pay 5,000 euros each week, but he could only scrape together 3,000 euros because of his financial situation. By January 2019, he was still trying to make payments, but it wasn't enough to tackle the huge debt. The intimidation didn't stop. Sandra Davis recalled another frightening incident in March 2019. Late one night, she heard noises and realized there were 5 men outside her house. Suddenly, the gang began smashing the front of the home. Every pane of glass was shattered. One man yelled at her, "Tell Jordan to pay his bills. It's not over, we'll be back." Terrified, Sandra fled her home after that attack and never returned. She was very angry with Jordan for bringing this danger to their doorstep. Jordan was living in constant dread, looking stressed and pale as his mum noted. Then abruptly, Jordan's demeanor changed in the spring of 2019. Shortly after the March attack on his home, he suddenly appeared unworried, almost as if he believed the threat had passed. He mentioned that there was a suspicious individual in the area, a guy with North Face gloves going around the estate on an orange bike, but Jordan had been assured that this man wasn't looking for him. By May 2019, the criminal scene in Dublin was on edge. On May 21st, Sean Little, the same guy who had previously threatened Jordan over his debt, was lured to a secluded spot outside North Dublin. The 22-year-old was shot and found dead next to a burning car near the M1 motorway. Little was out for revenge for the murder of his friend Zach Parker back in January, another small-time drug dealer who owed cash to a fingerless gang linked to the Kinahan Cartel. Little was a prominent figure in Coolock's criminal scene, closely linked to a gang leader from Fingless and the international Kinahan Cartel. Gardaí believed his murder was a result of gang betrayal, likely motivated by his desire for revenge for his friend Zach Parker's earlier death. Zach, just 23, was shot on January 17, 2019, while parked outside a gym in Swords. He was a minor drug dealer who owed money to a fingerless gang known as the Gucci Gang, which is affiliated with the Kinahan Cartel. He had lost a stash of drugs to the police and couldn't pay back the gang. Sean Little, a close friend of Parker, was reportedly eager to retaliate against those who killed him. Although no one was arrested right away for Little's murder, rumors and evidence later pointed to an unexpected suspect, Cowlan Smith, the very person who had gone with Little to threaten Jordan's mother. Smith, a hitman for the Kinahan Cartel, was suspected of betraying Little, possibly under orders to eliminate him to stop any revenge for Zach Parker's death. Just a day and a half later, on May 22nd, the ongoing conflict took another life. Despite numerous warnings, Jordan Davis was out strolling with his 4-month-old baby in a pram along a pedestrian path off Marigold Road in Darndale. A guy on an orange bike rode into the lane, approached Jordan and opened fire with a gun. 8 shots were fired. Jordan was struck at least 3 times and fell next to the pram. Thankfully, his baby boy was unharmed. Father Edward Quinn, who lived nearby, heard the gunfire and rushed over to assist. He gave last rites to Jordan, who had already passed away. This shocking daytime shooting happened just a short distance from both a primary and secondary school where Jordan had once studied. That afternoon, while on a bus, Sandra, Jordan's mother, learned about a shooting in Darndale. Her phone buzzed with the heartbreaking news. Her niece informed her that Jordan had passed away. Just 36 hours after Sean Little's death, investigators quickly realized that these two killings were connected. But who was behind Jordan's murder, and what was the motive? At first, some thought it could be revenge for Little. However, as the trial unfolded, it became clear that Jordan was killed over the very debt that had always put him at risk. Just a few days later, Gardaí detectives pinpointed their main suspect, Wayne Spuddy Cooney, a 29-year-old from Tallaght. Cooney was not only linked to Robert Redmond, but also dating Redmond's younger sister Rachel. CCTV footage captured a guy on an orange bike cruising around the area in the days leading up to the murder. One Garda witness later claimed he was 100% sure that the man was Wayne Cooney. As the investigation progressed, they found some incriminating WhatsApp messages from Robert Redmond to Jordan just 19 days before the murder. "Effing clown that can't pay bills trying to be a big man. Trust me, I'll get you soon." Followed by, "Very soon bang bang," with laughing emojis. Jordan simply replied, "Nice one, mate." 19 days later, Redmond's eerie threat came true. The legal proceedings unfolded slowly over the next 6 years. In July 2022, Wayne Cooney, the shooter, was convicted of murdering Jordan Davis due to strong evidence against him. The court labelled him as extremely dangerous, resulting in a life sentence with a minimum of 13 years. Then there was Robert Rue Redmond. For a while, he might have thought he was in the clear. He wasn't at the scene of the shooting, and with both Jordan and Sean Little gone, he had taken care of a significant debtor and a risky associate. However, key testimony from his ex-girlfriend, Aisling McNally, placed Redmond close to the crime scene. She testified that she had dropped him off at Belcamp Lane near Darndale on the day of the murder and picked him up from a nearby location just minutes after the shooting. In April 2024, after a lot of evidence piled up, Redmond admitted to teaming up with Wayne Cooney to kill Jordan Davis. He got a 7-year sentence, which is pretty lenient, but since he was already doing life for a different murder back in 2020, he'll be behind bars for at least 19 years. The last piece of the puzzle fell into place during Rachel Redmond's trial in March 2025. Rachel, who is Wayne Cooney's girlfriend and Robert Redmond's younger sister, faced charges for obstructing the capture of a murderer. Her lifelong friend, Stacey Hayes, gave crucial testimony. On the day Jordan was killed, Stacey was driving with Rachel when Rachel got a call from Wayne, asking for a ride. Rachel told Stacey to drop him off at a bus stop in Clare Hall. When Wayne got in the car, Rachel brought up the shooting in Darndale, and Wayne just shrugged it off, saying, "It's a mad place." Later that evening, Rachel used her bank card to book a room for Wayne at the Clayton Hotel near Dublin Airport, a good distance from Coolock to keep him hidden. Throughout the trial, Rachel insisted she had no clue Wayne had just killed someone, claiming she was just a lovesick girl helping her boyfriend. The jury, however, wasn't convinced. After 7 hours of deliberation, they found her guilty on both counts of hindering the investigation. The 2025 trial didn't just decide Rachel Redmond's future, it also revealed the harsh reality of a gang feud that had plagued Dublin's north side 6 years prior. What started as a drug debt escalated into a series of murders, leaving families shattered and communities in shock. Jordan Davis's case highlights how violence in Dublin's underworld can spill into quiet suburban areas. It illustrates how young men like Jordan can find themselves trapped in a vicious cycle of debt, drugs, and revenge, becoming both victims and offenders. After 6 long years, justice was finally served, with everyone involved, the shooter, the mastermind, and the accomplice, facing the music for their part in a crime that rocked the country. Beneath the sensational headlines and courtroom theatrics lies a grim reality. The drug trade continues to take lives across Ireland, not only through addiction but also through the horrific violence that comes with it. On March 24, 2025, news spread out in West Dublin. It was said that heavily armed Garda officers had undergone a sting operation to take out a criminal organization who had been on their radar for quite a long time. Who were the targets? They were Ireland's most wanted drug traffickers, a crime gang known as the Family. Simultaneously, over 1,000 miles away on Spain's eastern coast, the Guardia Civil and officers from Europol moved in on a warehouse in a choreographed strike months in the making. Within minutes, 12 men, including the gang's boss and his top lieutenants, were in custody. The takedown was swift and surgical, 6 arrests in Ireland and 6 in Spain. Within hours of the raids, law enforcement officials were hailing the operation as one of the most significant organized crime arrests in recent times. A global game of cat and mouse between authorities and the Family had finally come to an end. But how did a small Dublin gang, once little more than local drug dealers, grow into Ireland's biggest drug cartel? The roots of the Family can be found in the working-class neighbourhood of Ballyfermot in West Dublin during the late 1990s. Under the leadership of the driven Brian Grendon and his brothers, alongside seasoned criminal Derek O'Driscoll, the group began to systematically dominate the local heroin market. They were ruthlessly effective. They enlisted weaker residents and low-level users to serve as supervisors of stash houses and mules. The gang also targeted those who had previously recovered from addiction, using free samples to lure them back into drug usage. Then, using their rekindled dependence, they forced them to work as lookouts and drug runners in order to pay off debts. Although they faced a significant challenge in 2001 when 25-year-old Brian Grendon was arrested with 1.9 million euros worth of heroin and sentenced to 6 years in prison, this setback was only temporary. By the late 2000s, Grendon was released and returned to the drug trade, more astute and cautious than ever. During this developmental phase, the main leaders of the Family operated in Europe, acquiring knowledge and connections for multi-million euro drug transactions. But how did the Family grow from a small-time criminal organization into the massive empire they later became? In contrast to more prominent gangs that showcased their riches and authority, the Family opted for a subtler strategy, functioning discreetly to evade the watchful eyes of law enforcement. This tactic enabled them to expand their empire without attracting unnecessary attention. By 2010, the Family's presence in West Dublin's criminal scene was unmistakable. They had leveraged the economic growth in Ireland and were ready to exploit the expanding cocaine market. Their distinguishing factor was their low-key approach, avoiding sensational gang conflicts or notorious killings that could bring scrutiny. They did not shy away from violence. Instead, they used it in a calculated and purposeful manner. Violence served as a means of control, helping them maintain authority over their territories and communicate unambiguously with both competitors and allies. Betraying the Family would lead to fatal repercussions, and they made sure that the entire drug network was aware of this. One such instance occurred in February 2015 when police raided a property owned by Jason Rowe, an ally of the Family, in the Bluebell Industrial Estate. The findings were startling. A hoard of 2 handguns, 3 submachine guns, and many rounds of ammunition in hidden compartments, together with drugs worth 2.69 million euros in plain sight. This operation helped authorities understand the extent and intricacy of the Family's activities. As the Family's power expanded, so did their business strategy. While heroin continued to be their primary source of income, they branched out into cocaine, cannabis, and other substances. Following the notorious Regency Hotel attack in February 2016, which sparked the Kinahan-Hutch conflict, the Family observed the violence closely while discreetly strengthening their own position. Their dominance was not limited to drug trafficking alone. The Family established a stronghold over significant neighbourhoods in Dublin, such as Ballyfermot, Clondalkin, Ronanstown, Kilmainham, and Talot. In these communities, they developed a social economic framework that allowed their influence to permeate all facets of daily life, affecting everything from the local drug trade to businesses and social services. They primarily targeted young people as recruiters, luring them in with promises of luxury, fast cash, and designer clothing. But behind this alluring facade of prosperity was a dangerous trap, for these recruits often became disposable assets that could be readily replaced if caught by the police. The primary leadership was able to remain protected by this arrangement. By the end of the decade, the gang was delivering over 50 kilograms of cocaine a month, which was a huge amount that generated about 20 million euros in revenue annually. As the money started rolling in, the family quickly realized that money laundering wasn't just necessary, it was also dangerous. They needed a way to clean and move their profits without drawing attention, so they set up a seemingly legitimate logistics business. It did more than just help with transporting drugs. It became a front for investing and hiding their illegal earnings. Car dealerships and auto repair shops became some of their favorite covers. On the surface, they looked like ordinary businesses, but behind the scenes, they were funneling dirty money through the books. In June 2017, the Criminal Assets Bureau carried out a major raid, targeting 5 dealerships tied to the family's operations. It was the first big blow in what would become a much larger investigation. Authorities seized more than €1 million worth of assets, including high-end watches and luxury cars, Mercedes, BMWs, the kind of vehicles that stood out in the neighborhoods where they were found. A significant illustration of the family's wealth emerged in October 2020, when authorities conducted a raid on a secluded rural property believed to serve as the family's hidden cash reserve. Acting on intelligence, the Garda National Drugs and Organised Crime Bureau seized €4 million in cash concealed in a house near Ballybunion, Kerry. A concurrent search in County Lewis uncovered additional bundles, bringing the total cash confiscation to around €4 million, one of the largest in the history of Ireland. Referred to as the Gangland Bank by the media, the operation was overseen by 46-year-old associate Darren Hoey, who owned the Kerry stash house and was apprehended at the location. Investigators disclosed that profits from the family's drug operations in Dublin were routinely transferred to this remote site to evade detection. Earlier in 2020, Hoey had been stopped while driving through Kerry with €700,000 in cash, which led authorities to discover another €2.8 million stored in bags at the safe house. A ledger later revealed that from July to September 2020, nearly €18 million had been funneled through Hoey's activities for the family. These astonishing figures indicated a drug trade volume that rivaled even the notorious Kinahan cartel. Hoey was subsequently sentenced to 7 years in prison for his involvement, marking a significant setback for the gang's finances at that time. Nevertheless, the family's leadership remained resilient and adaptable despite these challenges. The family's reach extended beyond Ireland, establishing a strong foothold in Spain, which became a crucial entry point for drugs into Europe. Spanish authorities uncovered that the gang operated in at least 3 areas: Valencia, Murcia, and Malaga. Their main operation was centered in a warehouse located in Castellón de la Plana, Valencia province, which functioned as a distribution hub for drugs intended for Ireland. From this location, cocaine and other narcotics, frequently obtained from Latin American cartels, were sent out using cover loads and clever concealment techniques. The family's smuggling operations featured advanced communication strategies, but were straightforward in their implementation. They used encrypted phones to organize routes, drivers, and drop-off locations, while relying on established methods, concealing illegal goods in vehicles with specially designed compartments, some of which could only be accessed through hydraulic or electronic systems. To avoid detection, they often employed cloned license plates, replicating the registrations of legitimate trucks. By 2021, the family emerged as the most powerful drug syndicate in Ireland, surpassing the Kinahan cartel in both scale and influence within the country. This development would have seemed improbable just 10 years earlier. The Kinahans were well known internationally, backed by substantial financial resources and violent enforcers. However, a series of significant events favored the family, enabling their ascent without igniting a full-scale gang war. During this period, both the media and law enforcement began to recognize the family's newfound dominance. Having effectively displaced the Kinahans in their home territory, the family gained control over the distribution networks for numerous smaller gangs throughout Ireland, forming partnerships with groups in North Dublin led by Mr. Big and others in different areas. With the Kinahans increasingly sidelined in domestic affairs, the family established its own direct supply routes to South America and continental Europe. Central to this operation was a strong foothold in Spain, a long-established entry point for drugs into Europe. In September 2024, French cybercrime investigators pulled off a major win. They broke into Ghost, a heavily encrypted messaging app that criminals had counted on to stay under the radar. Much like the EncroChat operation in 2020, authorities quietly tapped into the system and spent 8 months reading messages in real time, all without tipping off the people using it. The people using it had no idea their messages were being watched in real time. What they uncovered was massive. The platform was being used by organized crime groups across the globe, and many of the messages led straight to the family. The operation, codenamed Kraken, saw Europol team up with the FBI, the Australian Federal Police, and law enforcement agencies from several countries. It quickly became one of the most ambitious and far-reaching investigations in recent years. To everyone's surprise, Ireland had more ghost users than anywhere else, around 100 active devices, many of them tied to major players within the family. By mid-September, investigators had enough to move. On September 16, 2024, officers launched coordinated raids across Ireland. About 300 Gardaí stormed 27 properties. What they found stunned even the most seasoned detectives. 16 million euros worth of cocaine and cannabis, 126 phones, 42 of them running the ghost software, and a network that was more organized and widespread than anyone had guessed. Armed Garda units conducted a significant raid on 6 properties in Dublin and the east of Ireland on March 24, 2025. The residences of the family's senior executives were the primary targets. During the early morning raid in West Dublin, Brian Grendon was caught off guard at his house and put into custody without a fight. His brother Philip was also taken into custody, along with 4 other prominent members of the organization. Additionally, a 6th suspect from Ireland, responsible for managing stash locations, was arrested later that same day. At the same time in Spain, the Guardia Civil carried out arrest warrants for individuals linked to the family's Spanish faction. Raids occurred in the Murcia and Malaga areas, as well as at the primary warehouse in Castellón. 6 men were detained, all deemed crucial to the gang's supply operations. The Spanish raids yielded significant evidence and assets, including 35,000 euros in cash, 12 luxury vehicles, and 4 transport trucks, many of which had concealed compartments filled with drugs, all altered for smuggling purposes. Overall, around 30 million euros worth of drugs were confiscated during the operation. Following these coordinated raids, the family's powerful organization was thrown into chaos. Millions in cash were confiscated, hundreds of kilograms of drugs were removed from the streets, and the leadership was imprisoned. A dramatic downfall for a group that had long viewed themselves as invulnerable.
People knew Kean Mulready Woods as a humble person who loved racing and had a bright future ahead of him. Everyone in Drogheda, a small town where everyone knew each other, liked him because he had a big smile. Kean was the kind of guy that everyone liked being around. He liked riding his scrambler bike and hanging out with his friends. Trouble was slowly creeping up behind that calm appearance, and the life he used to know was about to take a deadly turn.
Gardaí have appealed for information to help identify human remains found in a sports bag in North Dublin last night.
In due time, we will learn how a series of bad decisions and dangerous connections sent him down a road he could never go back from. Kean began hanging out with the wrong crowd when he was a teenager. What started as an interest quickly turned into a deadly pull. Criminals in the area told him they would give him money, expensive clothes, and respect. It looked like a simple way to get away from the normal life he was living. Kean couldn't stay away from the rush of being a part of something bigger than himself, and soon he was involved in Drogheda's small crimes, which showed his darker side. It was just a way to get something that seemed too good to pass up and feel strong. However, Kean did not understand that he was now on a road from which he could not return. The more Kean went into it, the more pressure he felt from his family. Owen Maguire, who was his uncle, was a terrible crime boss who everyone feared. Being connected to a criminal person with so much power was heavy. Kean no longer had a choice. He had to prove himself in this dangerous underground. Fear and violence were a part of the family history, and the young teen was becoming another piece of that bloody puzzle. Kean didn't know that his link to Maguire would soon make him a target in a war that was about to start. As things got worse for Kean, one more terrible thing was about to happen that would pull him even deeper into the chaos.
And recent gang wars have cost the lives of 3 people, 1 person paralysed, and seen a lot of arson attacks. The current cycle of violence in July 2018 was the attempted murder of Owen Maguire outside his house in the town. Maguire was shot at least 6 times in the stomach, shoulder and both hands, with 1 bullet lodging in his spine, leaving him paralysed. And Owen Maguire is the godfather of Kean Woods. He was a well-known associate of Cornelius Price, believed to be one of the leaders of the gang involved in the feud. The shooting sparked a series of tit-for-tat shooting.
The fight for control of the streets had been going on for years between Owen McGuire's gang and Robbie Lawlor's group. Not only was it about drugs and power, but it was also about people. They were fighting all the time, and it got worse every day. Shootings in the street, brutal beatings, and setting fires were just the beginning. Violence changed into revenge, though, and each side pushed the other further into the abyss. In 2018, the feud reached a breaking point when Owen McGuire, Kean's godfather, was ambushed at his home and shot 6 times by a gunman. The attack left McGuire paralyzed, unable to move below his waist, and that's when the real war began. With McGuire out of commission, the power vacuum left room for more bloodshed. The animosity between the two gangs deepened, and Robbie Lawlor became even more determined to prove his dominance. But it wasn't just about turf anymore, it was personal. Then came December 2019. A group of youths, no older than Kean himself, ambushed Lawlor outside a Dublin gym. What was meant to be a simple robbery turned into something far worse for Lawlor. The teens beat him and stole his gym bag, and the whole thing was caught on camera. Worse, the footage quickly spread across social media, humiliating Lawlor in front of the world.
Yes! That's only the start of it! That's only the start of it! That's only the start of it, Robbie!
But the most mocking part? The youths, laughing, took a pair of flip-flops from the gym bag and posted photos of themselves wearing them. That single image became a symbol of Lawlor's shame, something that would haunt him every day. As Lawlor's thirst for revenge consumed him, Kean Mulready Woods would unknowingly become the pawn in a deadly game, setting the stage for a trap that would change everything. The 12th of January 2020 began like any other day for Kean. As night fell, he called his mom and asked her to save some money for a cab so he could get home later. She had no idea that this would be their last chat. Kean had no idea that his whole world would change in just a few hours.
Kean was last seen in Drogheda by his family at approximately 6 p.m. on Sunday, 12th January 2020.
He was about to step into a trap that would kill him. The story was already moving forward. Paul Crosby and Gerard Cruz, 2 men with strong ties to Robbie Lawlor, were told to get Kean to go to a house at 31 Rathmullen Park. The meeting looked like it was just another get-together for gang members to talk. Kean didn't think twice because he wanted to show himself and was sure he was in charge. He had no idea that he was walking right into the hands of those who wanted to get rid of him. At first, when Kean got to the house, everything seemed normal, but that peace was broken very quickly. As soon as Kean walked inside, the door slammed shut behind him, and it became very clear what was really going on. His strength was surpassed by Crosby and Cruz, and in an instant, the house went from being a safe place to a terrifying one. They fought back, but Kean had fewer people than them. He was abused and beaten, and he couldn't do anything to stop the brutal attack. Then Robbie Lawlor showed up. Lawlor took out a knife and approached Kean with the calm of someone who had been waiting for this moment for too long. He slashed Kean's neck with the blade, and Kean's body went limp as the life drained from him. Everything changed in that instant. Kean's fight to stay alive was over, and his fate was sealed. As Kean lay bleeding on the floor, what came next would shock the nation.
When they went to this property, they immediately suspected that attempts had been made to clean up the scene there. There had been recent painting done and parts of the floor in a lounge had been replaced and furniture had been removed from the scene. Upon technical examination, blood belonging to Kean Mulready Woods was found at this house.
What Lawlor and his men did next wasn't just a murder, it was a statement. Robbie Lawlor wasn't done. What had started as a brutal murder turned into something even more grotesque. Lawlor, consumed by rage and humiliation, wasn't content with just ending Kean's life. He wanted to send a message, one that no one would forget. With methodical precision, Lawlor began to dismember Kean's body. The violence wasn't quick, it was drawn out. Lawlor showed no mercy as he cut Kean into pieces, each severed limb a symbol of the ruthless vengeance that had consumed him. The act wasn't just about silencing Kean, it was about making an example of him. Amid the horror of the dismemberment, something seemingly insignificant stood out: a pair of flip-flops. These flip-flops, worn by the youths who had humiliated Lawlor earlier that year, became a chilling symbol. To Lawlor, they weren't just a pair of shoes. They were a reminder of his public shaming. He included them in the grisly act, deliberately placing them with Kean's remains. The flip-flops were no longer a joke. They were a mark of revenge. Lawlor was making it clear: no one was safe from his wrath, especially not those who had disrespected him. With Kean's brutal end, the authorities were left with a gruesome puzzle, one that would lead them straight into the heart of Dublin's violent underworld. There was a mad rush to find Kean Mulready Woods. His family, friends, and the entire neighborhood were desperate to find him. They searched the streets, hoping for any clue that could lead them to Kean. As the hours turned into days, the police launched a full-scale investigation. It wasn't just a case of a missing person. It was a crisis that could shake Dublin's criminal underworld. But no one was prepared for what they would find next.
At approximately 9:55 p.m. on Monday, the 13th of January, Gerry responded to a 999 call that a bag containing human remains had been found at Feud Drive, Coolock, Dublin 17. A black Puma sports bag was recovered which contained partial human remains.
On January 13, 2020, kids playing in North Dublin found something very scary. Their eyes caught a black sports bag in a quiet, hidden place. At first, they thought it was just trash, but when they opened it, what they found inside was terrifying. Inside, they found Kean's cut-up body parts neatly packed and ordered. The flip-flops, which were the same ones worn by the kids who had made fun of Robbie Lawlor a few weeks before, were carefully put on top. People were shocked when they saw these personal items that were now stained with blood and death. It wasn't just a murder anymore. It was a sentence. Lawlor was telling everyone something. The police moved quickly, raiding several properties linked to the gang. Paul Crosby and Gerard Cruz were arrested, along with others connected to the plot. The investigation revealed how meticulously the murder had been planned and how Kean had been lured into the deadly trap. But even as the authorities made their moves, the violence didn't stop there. Months later, Lawlor's reign of terror came to an end. In a dramatic twist, he was gunned down in Belfast, his own brutal past catching up with him. The cycle of violence had finally come full circle, leaving a legacy of bloodshed in its wake. While Kean's murder was avenged, the scars left behind in the community would remain a constant reminder of the devastating price of gang violence. Kean Mulready Wood's brutal end marked the collapse of one of Dublin's most feared crime empires. 10 years in jail were given to Paul Crosby, who was a big part of getting Kean to kill himself. Another associate, Gerard Cruz, got 7 years in prison. Both of their terms were cut down. Cruz will be free in 5 years, while Crosby will be free in 7.5 years. Robbie Lawlor, the person who hit the victim and killed him, was killed months later in Belfast in a show of violence that had been planned for years. The Kinahan cartel started in the rough parts of Dublin. It was led by Kinahan, a guy with a sharp exterior that hid a cruel desire to get ahead. For some reason, Christie, who was sometimes called the Dapper Don, could take small businesses and turn them into huge foreign empires. He made ties that let him do business in places other than his home country. This was especially helpful when Ireland's economy was doing well during the Celtic Tiger. This was the moment when Christie saw a chance to grow. He focused on a bigger goal and grew his illegal business, bringing drugs from South America into Europe through the UK and Spain, which were important paths. But his empire wasn't just based on drugs. It was also a well-oiled machine of violence, money laundering, and strong ties with other crime groups that kept him out of reach of the police. His son, Daniel Kinahan, stepped into the leadership role as the cartel's operations flourished. While Christie laid the groundwork, Daniel masterminded the cartel's day-to-day dealings, strengthening their grip on the European drug trade. With contacts in Dubai, the Kinahans built an empire that was almost untouchable. until their own violence and the escalating risk of attention began to unravel everything. But just as they thought they had the world at their feet, cracks started to appear. The question wasn't if their empire would fall, it was when, and the answer would come sooner than they ever expected. As the government put more and more pressure on the Kinahan cartel, their kingdom started to show signs of stress. The first big blow to their plans came in 2010 with Operation Shovel. With help from Europol, the Spanish government began a surprise crackdown that messed up drug routes. The operation broke down the Kinahan's grip on Spain, which was a key hub for their trafficking network. Christy Kinahan almost got caught, but the gang didn't get away without getting hurt. They had to change because their actions were being seen and their power was going down. The Kinahan family quickly changed their plans and went to Dubai, a city that seemed almost too good to be true. Their illegal activities were safe in Dubai because of its lax financial laws. They could keep selling drugs and laundering money without worrying about European police. The city's high-class lifestyle and secretive banking systems made it easy for them to hide their activities. But Dubai not only kept their money safe, but it also showed that the cartel's power was changing. The Kinahan's operations became less stable when they lost Spain as a hub, so they had to rely more on other foreign connections. The cracks got bigger and stress inside the material came to the surface. The cartel's rivalries grew, and what had seemed like an invincible force began to break up. As the Kinahans scrambled to maintain control, their empire was crumbling from within, and the violent feud that would bring them to their knees was just beginning to take shape. The Kinahan cartel and the Hutch gang were at odds with each other in 2015, and many people were killed. The criminal underground in Ireland would never be the same after this fight. Gerry, the monk Hutch's nephew, Gerry Hutch, was killed by the Kinahan family. This set off the fight. They killed him because they thought he worked for the cops. As each gang tried to get even, the war between them got worse. The killings were just the beginning. It got really bad in February 2016 when someone attacked the Regency Hotel. It was one of the worst crimes in history. Gunmen dressed as police officers broke into the hotel where the cartel's boss, Daniel Kinahan, was going to a boxing weigh-in. It was clear who they were after: Daniel. Gunmen with AK-47s opened fire in front of a packed room to start their deadly search for him. As people ran for cover, chaos broke out. Daniel managed to get away, but a senior Kinahan officer named David Byrne was killed at the end of the attack. People were shocked by how violent the event was, and it got the attention of foreign media, which put the cartel on the world stage. After the attack on the Regency, things went very badly very quickly. It was now possible for everyone to see what had been a secret kingdom. The police put in more effort, and the constant fighting between the Kinahans and the Hutch gang caused even more deaths. The violence got out of hand, and bodies were found all over Dublin. As the world watched in fear, innocent people were killed in the crossfire, and the Kinahans' control over the city began to weaken. As the Kinahan family's empire fell apart from the inside, law enforcement tightened the noose. It looked like the gang would finally fall, but a new, more dangerous threat was waiting in the shadows to take over. In October 2024, law enforcement launched Operation Kraken, a high-stakes joint operation involving the Irish Garda, Europol, the FBI, and the Australian Federal Police. The mission's goal? To bring down the Kinahan cartel once and for all. The operation focused on cracking Ghost, the encrypted communication platform that the Kinahans had relied on for years to coordinate their drug shipments, manage money laundering, and maintain their global network. What the cartel didn't know was that their most trusted tool had been compromised. The police were able to get to the cartel's deepest secrets when they cracked Ghost. The cops now had access to every message, deal, and shipment. The amount of information received was amazing. Over 300 police officers raided 27 places across Ireland in the early hours of the operation. They found a shocking treasure chest full of illegal drugs worth millions of euros, 10 million euros in cash, and expensive items like brand watches, cars, and other valuable things. The size of the seizures made it clear that the cartel's power was falling apart. In the cartel's carefully planned world of crime, it was the final blow. The realization hit the Kinahans hard. Their encrypted communication system, the backbone of their operations, had been shattered. As raids continued, 11 arrests were made, and more critical information poured in from the seized data. The psychological toll was immense, as the cartel's leaders understood they had lost control. Detective Chief Superintendent Seamus Boland made it clear. The Kinahan cartel was no longer Ireland's dominant criminal force. But even as the Kinahans crumbled, something darker was emerging. Someone else was quietly waiting in the wings, ready to rise to power. As the Kinahan cartel's empire crumbled, Daniel Kinahan, Christy Kinahan, and their associates scrambled to evade the relentless pursuit of law enforcement. The family, once untouchable, sought refuge in Dubai, where they continued to live a lavish lifestyle. Yet their exile was not without pressure. International efforts to bring them to justice tightened, and Dubai's lenient financial laws couldn't shield them from the growing heat. The U.S. government imposed sanctions on the Kinahan family, freezing their assets and offering a $5 million reward for their capture, making them among the most wanted criminals in the world. With the Kinahans cornered, a power vacuum began to form. Other criminal organizations like the family quickly moved in, eager to seize control of the drug trade once ruled by the Kinahans. Though in exile, the Kinahans continued to run operations from Dubai, their reach stretching across borders. But their situation was growing more precarious. The recent extradition treaty between Ireland and the UAE threatened to expose them to greater risks. The Kinahans thought they had found a safe haven, but even in Dubai, their world was on the brink of collapse. And soon they would learn that even the safest places can become traps. The question now was, how much longer could they survive? When the Kinahan cartel went out of business, the family, a new Irish crime group, quickly stepped in to take its place. The Kinahans like to show off their wealth and violence in public, but the family has taken a more quiet approach, making sure they stay out of sight. As they quickly got stronger, they learned from the mistakes of their predecessors and grew in the drug trade. Their slow rise to power has made them even more dangerous because they stay out of sight while getting stronger. Even though the Kinahans are no longer in power, crime is still present in Ireland. The fight for control of the drug trade in the country is still going on, and police are working hard to stop new groups from taking over from the Kinahans. The fight between crime groups and the police is far from over, though, and it doesn't look like it will slow down anytime soon. With new forces rising and law enforcement closing in, who will take the throne next in Ireland's dangerous underworld? The Kinahan cartel may be gone, but the fight for control continues. The underworld in Ireland remains as dangerous as ever, and the power struggle is far from over. And that will be all for today's video. Let us know what you think in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notifications for more criminal gang stories. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.